That passes unanimously. So next on the agenda will be Historic Preservation Ordinance, request for council feedback for the preparation of a draft ordinance. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This ordinance has been in the works for quite some time and has gone back and forth between the Historic Landmarks Commission and other commissions.
Shut that door, please. I'm sorry. It's very loud in here. Thank you.
So without any further ado, we have Lee Butler, yes, he's here. I just wanted to make sure. Our planning manager, he will make a brief presentation. I'm so used to calling Andrew Crabtree, but he's on vacation. So Lee he worked on this ordinance and he'll make a brief presentation for the council.
We'll call Lee Butler while we can, right?
Yeah.
Lee Butler.
Welcome, left.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. So before you this evening is a request to proceed with the Historic Preservation Ordinance that would be incorporated into our zoning code as a new chapter. And the council would just be directing staff to proceed with future planning commission and city council hearings at this time. We're really here to get council direction and confirm that the ordinance is consistent with the direction that was previously provided. This ordinance would bring Santa Clara in line with other communities in the state and locally in the county that have historic preservation ordinances, and it would really codify procedures and provide certainty to both the public and the staff with regards to historic preservation. As the city manager mentioned, the ordinance has undergone a fair amount of transition and a lot of community outreach. Back in 2013 and 2014, the council appointed a committee to develop recommendations. And then in November of 2014, the council provided direction to staff to streamline that ordinance substantially. That streamlined version was brought back to the city council in August of 2015, and there was general support from the council at that time. And the council directed staff to conduct additional outreach as well as to coordinate with the State Office of Historic Preservation. And staff went through 2 separate rounds of comments and responses with the Office of Historic Preservation, and we received a final response from them in May of this year. The Historic Preservation Ordinance would identify the historically and architecturally significant properties as surveyed properties that meet the City Council adopted criteria that are currently in an appendix of our general plan, and they would need to be formally added to the Historic Resources Inventory. The process, the ordinance itself would codify a process for making changes to properties that are listed on the Historic Resources Inventory, and they fall in 3 categories. The first is maintenance, and preventative maintenance does not involve change in design, material, or exterior appearance. So things like painting, wood trim and siding repair, roof repair, patching, caulking, foundation, chimney repair, those kind of things would not require any city review, even if the property is listed on the Historic Resources Inventory. Small projects, here under minor additions or changes, those would go through an administrative process, and at staff level, those projects could be approved, even if they're listed on the Historic Resources Inventory. Now, minor projects are defined in the ordinance as things that have negligible visible changes. So if you're doing a small addition and it's to the rear of the property, then it could qualify. If you're doing some minor upgrades to your porch or changing things that don't affect the visual characteristics, that could be considered minor. And then the third category is major changes. And the ordinance is fairly flexible in how it identifies major changes, in that it can change as our codes and policies change. What it does is it refers to the architectural procedures that we have in place. And so right now we have, when someone's adding a bedroom and it's 4 bedrooms or more, then that would go to the architectural committee. If someone is doing a 2nd-story addition, then that would go to the architectural committee. And so any of these things, if someone's proposing demolition and rebuild, that would go to the architectural committee. So if a property is listed on the historic resources inventory and what they're proposing would trigger a review by the architectural committee, then it would also have to go to the Historical and Landmarks Commission for a recommendation. So those are the 3 categories, and the ordinance sets up findings that would have to be made for the latter 2, so the staff level review or the HLC and AC review. Those findings are making sure that the alterations do not significantly impact the structure and that they follow the Secretary of Interior standards and a couple others, but that's the gist of them. So the key features, the Historic Preservation Ordinance clarifies the roles and processes related to nominations, and the City Council can nominate a property to be included on the inventory. The Historical and Landmarks Commission can nominate a property, or the property owner can nominate a property. Importantly, this ordinance, consistent with prior council direction, would only allow that process to move forward if the property owner consents to the listing. And so if the City Council nominates it, or if the Historical and Landmarks Commission nominates it and the property owner is notified and they do not choose to proceed, then the process would stop there. That's how the ordinance is currently worded. It sets the procedures for city review of historic resources inventory properties, and it clarifies the minor and major alterations. And it also limits the properties that are reviewed by the Historical and Landmarks Commission to those that are on the historic resources inventory. So if you're not on the inventory, then you would not go to the Historical and Landmarks Commission for recommendation. There is one exception to that, which I will call out, and that is in the case of a demolition. If the community development director believes that the property may be eligible for the historic resources inventory, then he or she has the ability to refer it to the Historical and Landmarks Commission in that instance. There are a number of other cities in our county that have, a number of other jurisdictions that have historic preservation ordinances in effect, and the 5 of those are listed here on this slide. And this evening, the staff is asking that the council direct the city manager to proceed with the process for adoption of the historic preservation ordinance. And depending on the level of changes that we may receive from the council, that could happen as soon as August for a planning commission review and recommendation, with a first reading from the city council in September. And staff is available for any questions that you may have.
Councilmember O'Neill?
Thank you. So Lee, the only thing, and I may have lost this battle, the last time I think we looked at this, there was some discussion about context, because I went on your slide where it talked about the review of the applications restricted to the HRI properties only. So say a property is next door to a property that's on the historic resource index, and if, say, they want to do something pretty radical to it, I know we had some discussion, so did we decide that the fact that it's right next door to a historic property, that there would be no review of what they want to do to that property, considering the context of the street or its proximity to a historic property?
Thank you for raising that point, because that is currently the way that we are operating in terms of referring properties within 100 feet. And the ordinance as proposed would not include that referral.
Okay. All right, well, I myself have some concerns about that, but, and also the compilation of, I just want to make sure I understand this, of the Historic Resource Index. We are going to start from the list that's in the general plan, and then whoever wants to go through the process of adding their properties, or if the city or somebody wants to make nominations, but we're going to start from that list that's already published?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Those are the two questions I have for now.
Councilmember Davis?
I think you kind of already answered one. I was looking for I think I've requested this before, a layover of the old quad as to see who was in there that was historical, because I know that some houses go through conversion issues. And so do we have a map, a layover of all these houses? Because I even asked that for the NERC meeting too.
We do have that information. So there's a list in an appendix of the general plan.
Okay, because this one that you have here, it has everybody, all of the. It says the architectural or historical significant properties, so they're all in here.
So everyone listed in that appendix would be subject to the HLC referral.
Okay, good. That's what I wanted. Thank you.
Councilmember Mahan?
Thank you. So if you can just say, I don't want to be on the historic resources inventory, even though your house is historic, and take it off, does that mean that your house is no longer subject to historic review by HLC?
So there is a process for removal that is identified in the ordinance. And so if there is a resource that is currently identified on the inventory, they would have to go through a removal process, and the council would have to approve that. There would be a recommendation from the Historical and Landmarks Commission, and then the council would have to approve it for removal. But there may be instances where a property is eligible, say they wanted to demolish that structure and council said it's eligible, and we would have the opportunity then through the architectural review process to not allow that demolition, even if we weren't going to add it onto the inventory.
How complete is our current list?
I would say that there are many opportunities to add properties to the list.
Thank you. That's a very gracious way to put it. Okay.
Very political.
So why, if our list is incomplete, and I agree, I think there's room for improving it, expanding it, why aren't we then, and I share Councilmember O'Neill's concern about the adjacent property, if you're adjacent to a historic property, can we make this ordinance be applicable to properties that are either on the list or eligible to be on the list, would go directly to HLC? Because otherwise, we're putting the homeowner through two hoops instead of one. And if you say, well, you can go to AC, Architectural Committee, but if they say, oh, you're eligible, we're going to send you to HLC, I mean, you've actually doubly burdened the homeowner, and we're trying to use this to make it simpler. And then if you're within 100 feet of an historic resource, either on the list or eligible to be on the list, the same thing applies because of the impact it could have on the historic property. My feeling, like Councilmember O'Neill, is it should go to HLC, because that way, again, you don't have to send them two places, send them to the appropriate place first. And not to say that their plans would be denied, but they would be looked at in the context of how does it affect the property next door or the property behind them that has significant features that we want to, we don't want to obscure it, or we don't want to make it clash, or we just want to make sure that it stays compatible. So those would be my suggestions, is we say it applies to any house that's either on the list or eligible to be on the list. Get removed, I guess that's fine. And then add the property within 100 feet of an eligible property or an historic property.
And so I just want to make sure that I was clear in terms of the referral of properties that are not listed on the inventory, but are eligible. That would only occur if demolition was proposed under this ordinance. And so if someone had a property that is eligible for listing, and they're not on the inventory, and they want to add a fourth bedroom, they would go to the architectural committee just like any other project, but they would not go to the HLC unless
Don't
they're
historic
listed.
properties go to HLC for review for additions and remodels?
Only if they're listed on the inventory.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I always think should apply whether you're listed or eligible, because so many of our eligible properties are not on the list. If our list were complete, I wouldn't have this concern, but right now our list is incomplete. So that's what I'm saying. I think both demolition and review, architectural review, should go to HLC if you are an historic property, or if you're an eligible property, you qualify as historic, but you're just not on the list for some reason, or if you're within 100 feet of a historic or eligible property.
That's why I wanted the list. That's why I wanted the layover.
And then you just go right to HLC. You don't have to do things twice.
That's why I need the layover.
Councilmember Vice Mayor Caserta.
Actually, you know what, I'll make comments when appropriate. Sorry, Madam Mayor.
I have an issue with that because then we would be sending everything to HLC, and we talked about that before at the meetings, that's what you get on the list to go to HLC. I think my concern is that there'd be no demolition without oversight approval. We don't want any historical homes demolished in the city, but if you're on the list, you go to HLC. If you're eligible, that would be almost every single property in town. If you're eligible to be on the list, then HLC would be acting like the planning commission, and it's not set up that way.
I would just say that if we're talking about eligibility, I think that the direction that council provided some time ago was attempting to strike a balance between the regulatory environment that a single-family homeowner has to encounter, along with the property rights that they may have. And if we're trying to determine if a property is eligible for the inventory, then there is a fair amount of work that goes into that. There's what's called a DPR form, a Department of Parks and Recreation form. And, you know, the cost of those varies, but it's roughly about, ballpark $2,500 to prepare one of those DPR forms by a historic consultant. And so just establishing the eligibility threshold is a additional hurdle that we would need to consider in that scenario if we were referring all eligible properties to the HLC. So that's something for the council to consider in terms of balancing that regulatory approach versus the
Right, we
property
talked
rights.
about that, so it would add time and money, and who would pay for those reports? And if it's done without the property owner's permission, are we able to do that? I mean, that brings in a whole nother aspect of this that I thought we discussed about that already. Councilmember Caserta.
Thank you,
Vice
Madam Mayor.
Caserta.
I need your help on this, Lee. As someone that lives in the old quad, it lightens me and makes me throw up in my mouth when I see these garden apartments in our neighborhood. So I'm trying to strike a balance between celebrating and supporting the jewel that is the old quad, and there's other great jewels in our city that are historic other than the old quad, while also balancing property rights. But my whole point again is a neighbor might have property rights, but their property rights should be in relation to also me as a neighbor that is supporting a historic home. So that's why I'm very sympathetic to what Patty is saying, and I'm just trying to have you help me clarify this, knowing that I was the one that, really pushed for this to get to this point, and we're not going to talk about Julio and all that. But this is important to me. I campaigned on this. I put my largest investment in my house in supporting historic homes. I think my property rights need to be balanced with my neighbors. So can you help me with that a little?
Sure. I think some of the protections that are in place are the ones that we currently have in relation to the referrals to the architectural committee. So if, for example, the apartment buildings, if someone were proposing to tear down a single-family home, and whether it's a new apartment building or a new single-family home, right now, the provisions that we use to refer items to the architectural committee that involve a public hearing and a discussion here in this chamber with the community, some of those triggers include building demolitions. And so if someone were proposing to demolish a home and build a new one, then there would be a public hearing associated with that, and the community would have an opportunity to speak, and staff would have an opportunity to weigh in. There are findings about the compatibility of that structure with the surrounding area, and so there would be an opportunity to approve, deny, or conditionally approve a proposal. And if someone were, for example, choosing to, or requesting to, I should say, demolish a home that may or may not be eligible for the inventory, but has some character that is consistent with the older homes in the old quad, for example, that demolition would trigger that public hearing where the community would have an opportunity to weigh in.
One last question. Can you please stay?
Yeah.
That should be an order, not a question.
Councilmember Mahan?
Yes, I had some follow-up questions then. So eligibility is not just being 50 years old. I mean, that's the state law. We understand that. And that's, Mayor's right. Majority of our homes meet that standard. But that's not the criteria to be historic and fall under the Historic Preservation Ordinance. That's just the state law. We can't change it. We're stuck with it. They should maybe change it, but they haven't. But in order to be designated historic, either voluntarily or by the city, you have to have certain criteria. You have to have your historic integrity intact. You have to be significant. So it's not just an old home, it's a historically significant home. Significant is based on historical significance, somebody important lived there, it was an important place. It has cultural significance, vis-a-vis it was, some society was there. It has architectural significance, it's a unique style. It has geographic significance because of where it's located, something occurred there. Or it has archaeological significance. There are cultural resources on the site. So it's not just being 50 years old, it's being significant. Now, a property can be added to our historic resources inventory either by the city. The city started a list long ago. My house got listed years and years ago. That survey has never been completed. There's so many homes that are not on that survey just because staff didn't have the time, it wasn't a priority, or for whatever reason. The other way a house can become historically significant on the historic resources inventory is if the homeowner voluntarily wants to put it there. And yes, they have to do this DPR form, this Department of Parks and Recreation form, and they have to pay for it. But they're doing it because they're going to get significant benefits from this designation. They're going to be able to use the historic building code. They're going to be, they can apply the Department of Interior standards and they don't have to comply with modern zoning codes. They're going to qualify for a Mills Act. They're going to have a lot of benefits by being on the survey. So they're willing to pay for that DPR form and voluntarily get placed on the historic resources inventory. But for all those homes where the owners are either long-term owners, they don't know, they don't care, but they're not changing their house, but it is an historic house, or for a new owner who isn't aware, doesn't want to go through the expense, for whatever reason it is, we can't rely on the homeowners always to come forward and voluntarily put themselves on this list. So we are letting a lot of historic homes escape the application of this ordinance if we don't do something either to complete our survey, which would be fine. If we had a complete survey, then we could adopt this as it is. But until we do, I think we have to have some criteria of saying if your house is eligible to be on the historic resources inventory, that you need to go through historic review, not architectural review. I mean, maybe there's some middle ground. If there was always an historic landmarks commissioner as a liaison to architectural or member of architectural committee, you know, if we restructured our architectural committee, so we always had that historic person there to make judgments and input into historic residences, that could help. That may be a way around it. So I think it's great, and what's here is wonderful, and we need this. I mean, if this is a baseline, at least we get something in place. I'm not saying that we shouldn't adopt it, but I'm just saying we have to sort of find a way to fill in that gap. There's got to be a way to fill in that gap and capture those homes that do qualify but aren't on the list.
So, Lee, in order to capture the homes that do qualify, it needs that study and a certain amount of time. So again, what's that? So who does that and who pays for it, and can we do that without the property owner's permission?
So there would certainly have to be outreach to those property owners so that they can have their say in the matter, particularly because there are additional rules and regulations that would apply to them, and we would want to give them their opportunity to weigh in. In terms of the costs, I mentioned, each individual property is typically about $2,500. There could be a historic context statement. Those range from roughly about $50,000, just ballpark again, and that could look at the significance of a larger area and how that area has developed. In terms of the costs for that, my understanding, and I don't have all the history on this, but my understanding is that typically the property owners themselves, if they are interested in it, and the way this is structured, the current ordinance, or excuse me, the proposed ordinance is structured, the property owners would be responsible for the payment of those fees. If it's something that the council was wishing to do, then that would be a city cost, and we would be working within the budget to identify how those costs could be allocated.
Right. So the key is to try to make it voluntary and attractive to list your property on this. And I know in the past, and what we talked about when we talked about this ordinance, was that the property owners were going to pay for it, because I don't know how we could possibly capture hundreds, maybe a lot more than that, properties with the city doing this work and paying for it for the property owners that aren't listed on this, the ones that don't volunteer. And again, can we do it without the property owner permission? I'm not sure we can. Councilmember Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for the city attorney. Just listening to the discussion here, I know that based on the discussion that several members on the dais have historical homes. I mean, is there a conflict of interest here? I mean, should they be recusing themselves from this? Because it seems like ultimately this is something that would benefit them. It's just something that...
This is a broad enough ordinance where I don't think it would have an individual conflict of interest. So I mean that would be my perception at this point. I don't know I haven't specifically looked into it, but I've always thought of this as a very broad ordinance. And if an ordinance has an effect on the public in general, and it would happen to possibly have an effect on someone individually, then it would not be a financial conflict of interest under the state codes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of Lee while we're here? All right, thank you, Lee, but stay put, because there probably will be some more
Questions?
So I have a couple cards from the audience. We'll start with Jeannie Mahan and Scott Lane. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Gilmore and Council, and thank you. I'm Jeannie Mahan, and I was a member of the Historic Preservation Ordinance Committee that wrote the original document. I'm also a commissioner for Historic and Landmarks, and I'm a very concerned citizen. I had some comments, but I think I want to address a few other things first. As a historic landmark commissioner, I do really want to caution or speak that eligible homes do come before historic landmark commissions, not just designated, but eligible. There's not hundreds. I mean, we have had our last 2 meetings canceled because we haven't had any, quote, business. But eligible homes, when they've worked with us, have been very supportive, and they've been really appreciative of pointing out the historic things about their homes, and have been very willing to work within our recommendations. In fact, some, after being eligible, have said, well, now I really want to apply for designation and go through the DPR process. And I do think that we don't want to lose the homes that are eligible, because those are part of our historic jewels as well. And as far as the 100 feet that we used to go by, a home would have to come before HLC if it was within 100 feet of a designated property. And one example really stands out in my mind. It was this not historic home at all. I want to say it was Lafayette Street. And next door were 2 historic homes, beautiful historic homes. And the owners were very concerned. And because of that rule, that house came before us. And they were going to put up a whole second story, block their light, put in a circular driveway that impacted their 2 homes. And if it hadn't come before HLC with the recommendations that this would not work, that would have happened and really impacted the 2 historic homes that were there. I know they're not part of the revised ordinance, but I do think they are important. Sorry, I just really want to say that we need this formal legal basis, though, for preservation of our ordinance. We're one of very few cities that does not have one, and I really think we're being short-sighted if we don't allow our city this protection. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Lane?
Pleasure to address the council on this. In support of some of our city council members, I would actually argue that some of the homes are more valuable when you do not have this historic designation, because anything can be done to them. So homeowners in Santa Clara are facing a risk to try to do the right thing and get the historic significance. So I just want to put that out there. I'm speaking for myself. I'm actually on leave from San Jose PAC, the political organization that tries to support homes and businesses and organizations that are in wonderful structures. About a year or so ago, and I brought up the fact that I thought there were deficiencies on the list, I was assured by the city council, oh no, it's fine. Well, I'm glad to hear that actually I was right a year or 2 ago. We ran into the issue with the Mackey homes, that people wanted to actually, rightly so, build their homes, but when we have, guidelines, those are never strong enough. We need ordinances, but those aren't strong enough. But even some of the details to try to support the Mackey homes were quite insufficient. You can actually create a second-story home and make it historically significant still and make it in the character. So I want to just reinforce how important this is, but we need to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. I really want to commend people that are asking about their neighbors, because it's not just this home or that home, it's the collective feel. And once you start gutting these homes or redoing them, you lose the feel of the entire neighborhood. So once again, I can't remember how many years ago I proposed, we need historic districts in Santa Clara. We need to look across the city and understand the more historic districts we have, the more community we build, the more we will have a look of sense and feel. I know it's fancy to talk about placemaking and stuff like that. This is the 1 or 2 companies that Santa Clara used. But bottom line, what is placemaking? It was these old homes that were built that were fantastic. There was a placemaking with each and every single one of these homes. And that's important, but collectively that's what's important. And not just an old quad. I think it was said very well. We need to look across the city on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? I don't have any other cards. Please come forward. You can line up, and that's great. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Boone. I just wanted to bring up what does historic preservation include? And you've been speaking about houses, but another aspect of protecting our heritage in the area does include the trees. So I know that the city doesn't have a tree protection ordinance. That's my understanding.
I think we do. Yeah. We don't?
That's kind of key to my comment. I thought that there isn't one. If there is, it hasn't resulted in a dense urban forest like in some other cities in the region. It isn't, there are trees, a lot of, in the older part of the city, downtown, there are big trees, but a lot of the city, it's kind of devoid of a canopy. And, that can result from not having strong enough protections for trees. Trees are part of history. They live a long time, longer than we do. And I think that part of a historic preservation ordinance should include trees. And effort should be made to preserve trees as long as possible so that a canopy can be created, so that wildlife have a habitat to live in, so that people really benefit from having shade and having older, mature trees in more parts of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. And is it heritage trees?
Heritage tree inventory.
Heritage tree inventory and. Anyway, sorry. Go.
Oh, okay.
Come on.
All
Come
right.
forward.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I want to say a couple things. One is my house is on the Mills Act, and I didn't see it on that inventory. So that inventory is not complete. So I was kind of surprised. I'm somebody who did on my own go forward and pay the fee to have my house be designated, and I'm very proud of it. And I purposely moved to this neighborhood, to the Old Quad, because of the homes and the historic nature of it. So I very much plea for you to support the ordinance. It's something we've been wanting for a long time. We really feel we need to have that protection. I paid money to have my house have this designation because I want it to be protected. And so I also like to see my city council feel that they treasure our old homes just as much as we treasure our old homes, because it is the fabric of our city. And so really support this ordinance, and I hope you do too. Oh, Janet Stevenson.
Yeah. Thank you. We do have to make sure the homes, all the Mills Act homes are on the list in the inventory. Yes.
Noreen Carlson, it's very good to see everyone tonight. I'm really passionate, and I'm going to try not to use any F-bombs. But I go to Paul Revere's house.
Wake us up, Noreen, if you did that. Yeah.
We've got to do something about the Old Quad, guys. Go to Palo Alto, go to Los Gatos. This is our oldest city, and if we don't protect, I'm talking about 100-year-old houses. It took me 50 years after moving from Boston to finally get my old house, and it's gorgeous, and I just had a heart attack doing my kitchen. But anyways, it's gorgeous if you want to come over and see it. But please, I don't think this is strong enough. Patty, I agree with you 100%. I don't know why we can't put Mills Act houses for sure on this list. We don't need to pay $2,500 to write down a house address. Let's not be so bureaucratic and so politically correct that we're just going to destroy this. Just overlay the Old Quad. The rest of the city will work with it. These houses are 100 years old and more, and we've got to protect them because we can't build that character in. We've already lost our downtown that we're desperately trying to get back with. We're trying to work with developers to try to make our Old Quad old and keep it. It's beautiful, and please, 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 even if you don't like old houses, help us. Thank you.
Thanks, Noreen. Good evening.
Good evening. Mark Kelsey, resident here in Santa Clara. I strongly support adoption of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. It does need to be strengthened. The list needs to be complete. We do need to consider the context, the properties around it. But as Scott pointed out, we have a very important historic district here in Santa Clara in the Old Quad, as Janet and Noreen have talked about. We need to protect all of these homes. That's why we have the Old Quad today. That's why we need to keep it. I think failure to adopt this would really be another blow for the residents of Santa Clara and for the Old Quad. We've been waiting for this for so long. It's been long delayed. There seems to be no urgency about it, and I'm so glad it's here tonight. I really want us to adopt it and be able to move forward with it and do what we need to do to strengthen it as we build on the base. So thank you for your support of this.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening.
Good evening, Susan Colbeck, and I hope that we can get this settled tonight. However, I was a little dismayed to hear that the margin around historic homes has been reduced. I understand talking to a neighbor many years ago, and this is just hearsay, it was 300 feet, and now it went to 200, and now I heard, if I heard it right, they're talking about eliminating that. So somebody could come in to one of these lovely historic homes and build whatever they want, and, you know, living in the Old Quad area, I am very familiar with the charm that Santa Clara has. Unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with the rest of the city, but it's wonderful too. And I really hope that you proceed with this ordinance, but I just really want to make sure that the historic buildings that are on the list do have that buffer around them. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Adam Thompson. I live in the Old Quad and have a Mills Act property. I think this is a great base to start with, and I hope you guys do approve it. But I do think there are some things that should be tweaked a little bit to better address some of the concerns of many of the residents, along with some of your council member comments. Yep. I mean, one thing is just the demolition compared to possibly also having some architectural protection in there as well. So, I mean, my house was stuccoed at one point. I mean, I have a V-groove siding. It was beautiful, and someone stuccoed it. I mean, if somebody stuccoed my neighbor's house, it would be atrocious. It looks like a lot of the regular tract homes built in the 50s. So I would like to see some kind of protection to make sure, well, if you are going to do a minor addition, you're not going to put some kind of glass steel structure on the front porch, and make it completely out of context with the neighborhood. And then, is there a possibility to keep the 100-foot HLC recommendation for properties that are registered? Maybe not the ones that are just considered, but if my house is registered, can there be a 100-foot radius around that house to make sure that the ones that are on our list have some protection? I mean, if the property owners that aren't registered don't want to be registered, don't want to take the process, then, they're not going to be looking for that protection. But the ones who do pay the money and do take the time and do love and appreciate the neighborhood, I think we should have a little bit more protection. And the last comment is, I do think the Old Quad, I mean, I moved there for the neighborhood. I mean, like Mr. Lane said, it only works when they're all unique and beautiful, and that's the sense of the community. So I really want to make sure we retain that down there. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Yes, please come forward. Good evening.
Hi, Hudson Washburn, resident of the city. And I also agree that I like the ordinance to a large extent, but I also believe we should be extending it to a 100-foot radius or some number, actually even larger, but at least 100-foot. Because if you don't have some buffer or some input on what's going on around you, it's really the benefit of controlling your own house is not that great. So I think it's really worthwhile, and I want to support that. The city of Santa Clara has a good inventory of historic homes, but in fact, it doesn't have a very good reputation. I know from people I've talked to, it's not considered that way, and I think this is the beginning of it. I think we have other things that we can do to try to improve the neighborhoods, but I think this is certainly the big starting point, that we need to control the historic homes that the city does have. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. Charles Tucker, live over on Main Street. Santa Clara is one of the few cities that has not adopted a historic preservation ordinance, which will clearly define the scope of the properties that are subject to historic preservation and applicable design guidelines. The ordinance specifies the nomination procedure for the listing on the city's historic inventory and identifies the properties that are subject to review and recommendation by the Historic Landmark Commission. The information has only been verbal until now. We have been drafting and working with an ordinance for over 3 years. this is an extensive amount of time to cover a matter that is going to strike a really important balance between the regulations that we have in the city, the property rights of individuals. We need to come to some streamlined permit processes. Protection for the city's most important resources is the prime incentive. Balanced approach with will promote the identification, protection, perpetuation of Santa Clara structures. Adopting this ordinance eliminates the uncertainty for owners, for staff, commissions, council, and will allow staff to expeditiously process applications. It permits a process for major alterations and demolitions. It deals with a way to handle minor changes to this historic property. According to the agenda report signed by Mr. Crabtree, Director of Community Development, and Mr. Batra, the City Manager, there are no disadvantages to adopting this ordinance and no cost to the city other than administrative staff time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Vartan?
Good evening. I wasn't planning on speaking with this. I definitely have a soft spot for historic preservation. I think that this area in general, maybe not the old quad, but in general, this county is devoid of a lot of what I see as really old structures that are preserved. But one thing I hope that this allows for, and I don't know the ordinance as much, and I don't live in the old quad. I don't actually live in Santa Clara, so I don't want to mislead anybody with my comments, but I hope it allows for, or the policy allows for, future developments that may not necessarily be in character with a historic home, but I'd hate to see a technicality of, well, it's within X amount of feet, get in the way of a larger development that might benefit the area overall. So the thing that comes to mind is the prior Irvine development, now the Prometheus development, that's right in the old quad. Maybe, that borders something, and I would hate to see a condition like that prevent something that would progress the city to help something, especially since you got some mass transit resources and heavy rail resources right in your backyard, that you can still support those with higher intensity developments that might not be as compatible with a historic preservation ordinance. So that's it.
Thank you. Sam?
Sam Hagag here. I think you guys know my position on historic homes. I have a very historic home. Probably most of you already know that. One of the things I like about this ordinance is how it strikes a balance between historic preservation and property owners' rights. I think some other people were speaking about that, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But there's a comment that I want to bring up that I don't think anybody mentioned here, and from my own personal experience, I feel strongly about this, but as the role of the HLC becomes, they take on more responsibility in their role, even though there's still a advisory capacity. There are no requirements for having a professional background in the areas of architecture or construction or being a historian to be a member of the Historical Landmarks Commission. And other cities in our area that have an HLC, some of them do have a requirement that you have a professional degree in architecture, history, or be a licensed contractor. And still, with all respect to our commissioners in the HLC who volunteer their time, they don't have that professional background. And yes, they do get some training on Secretary of Interior standards. They do get direction from city staff, but they still don't have the full training that somebody who has a professional license in these areas has. So as and I do acknowledge that we have 2 volunteers that go to HLC. We have the honorary city historian and a licensed architect, but I still don't think that's a good enough remedy because A, they're still volunteers, and B, I do believe it is a bit of a conflict of interest that those same 2 individuals are on the city's list of recommended people to go to get an updated DPR. So how can you be on, being the volunteer advisory capacity, but also be on the list to prepare an updated DPR? So I don't think that's appropriate. And I think, again, as the HLC becomes more important, that its members should also be, licensed professionals in that.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Bev Romack. I had the pleasure of having Councilmember Cacerda's little cousin in my class this year, so that was just darling in my first grade class. No conflict of interest. But I just wanted to really beg your support of an ordinance. I didn't write anything, so I probably will ramble, which I do every day. But I was called a pioneer by working for months to get my house. The reason I was called a pioneer is because it was the youngest home in the city to be recognized with the Mills Act. And we did the midnight waltz at the council meeting because my issue came up just after midnight. And I went home and I just sat on the porch and I just looked at the sky and I just felt like it had won an Academy Award. I was so touched. And so, and I worked long and hard with the help of Mr. Faria, obtaining 17 pages of petition. I walked away from the counter over there in the building with tears streaming down my face because they said, "What's so special about your house? This is going to raise a lot of eyebrows." Because it's only 1948, and some people think they look like tract homes, but it's so critical to preserve that sampling, and I'm so tickled that because of the hard work that we put in and all the research I did, the house to my right is on the Mills Act, and the one to my left is hoping to obtain it, but yet we have had a second-story addition approved recently, and that's going to be 3 on the street. The area is, so it does. So please keep that big buffer. And anyway, I don't have many more seconds, so please consider this and support the historic preservation.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Keep going out there. We still have more Mills Acts to give out. Okay. Next.
I have a couple questions about this and a real-life situation. My illness causes me to lose chunks of information, so I can't remember the name of the street that we had. Debbie, by us, you had to leave the dais, but it was where a person came in with a bunch of his neighbor. Yeah, Claremont's, thank you. And it was a big remodel, and it looked tremendously different than the rest of the neighborhood. And somebody just said up here, well, don't worry, if they're not on the historic list, that will go with the guidelines, and that'll protect the neighborhood. Well, no, that's not true, because Claremont failed. That's a house that's going to stick out like a sore thumb, and this council approved it. And the Planning Commission approved it. And it doesn't look anything like the rest of the neighborhood. So if you guys are going to hang your hat on that, you might as well just throw it into the wind because you're doing the same thing. So that's not going to preserve it. So that's not something you should depend on because it doesn't work. Our guidelines don't work and it's not going to protect your homes. The second thing that wasn't addressed is if that house gets on the list by somebody putting it on there and then the house gets sold and the next person doesn't want it, or they sell it to somebody who's going to make it into a mini dorm, does it come off? Does it stay on? What happens then? Does the guy say, I don't want it, and he gets to take it off? That wasn't addressed with change of ownership. And what happens, because there's a lot of beautiful homes, and I think the garden apartments are a real good example of how it's gotten screwed up before. So I think you need to have some kind of a buffer or region, something. I think this act, it's a great start, but I don't think it's got the teeth or it's big enough or strong enough to protect it that you don't have more garden apartments putting next door to beautiful homes. And so much of America, we throw out and destroy our heritage and what's beautiful. And we have beautiful homes. Can't we try to keep them, please?
Thank you, Debbie. Mr. Faria, good evening.
Good evening, Lou Faria. I don't think it'll be a great surprise to any of you to know that I'm here to support the ordinance. We have seen this ping-pong back and forth for many years. I agree with, I don't want to go over all the points. I agree from all the speakers before me, from Jeannie Mahan all the way down to Debbie Bress. All the things that said I agree with. I also agree with Councilman Mahan, and I think Mr. Caserta also brought up the points about the homes next to them or within a certain area is essential. Also, that homes that could be designated should also go to HLC. So these things I support and hope that they could be added maybe even later if not. And I guess I've advocated this for over the 40, I've been here for over 45 years. I've lived in the city in the Old Quad. This year has been 40 years. I've tried to get this passed. It's on my bucket list. I do not have another 45. I do not have another 45 years to live. So please, let's get it through while I'm still breathing. Thank you.
Well, I hope today's your lucky day, Lou. Anyone else? Councilmember Davis.
Okay, Lou, I'm going to give you your wish. You're going to get your bucket list. Okay, I would like to move that we do staff recommendation, but I have some little contingencies to put on this. I want to make sure that that 100-foot radius recommendation is in there, Lee, that is totally in there.
If we could keep it.
I also want to make sure that all that Janet Stevenson brought up, the Mills Act homes are in this, because when I asked you the question, is this inventory complete? She said her home was not listed on this. So I want to make sure that those are all listed. The Mills Acts, anybody that has a home on that, I want to make sure that those are part of that. And also, I would like a 6-month review so that the layover that I requested through being on the NERC meeting and the NERC, whatever that is, our lovely little council committee, because we requested this before so that we know what houses are out there. I just want to make sure that everybody is taken care of. So I would like a 6-month review to make sure that these are all in place. And if we do come upon any issues, that we'll be able to amend this ordinance to make sure that we do comply with the wishes and dreams of people that have been waiting for this for 40 years. So I'm hoping that that will be seconded and we can move on and people can put their heads on their pillows this evening.
Okay, thank you. So that's a motion to direct the city manager to prepare a draft historic preservation ordinance for council's consideration.
Correct.
Adding the conditions of a 6-month review, 100-foot radius, and all milled out properties included in the inventory.
Make sure
And
everybody's in
continue
there.
to work on our inventory.
The seconder would also like to add one thing. In addition to adding the properties that are already having Mills Act, we also add properties that have had DPRs, because it's not necessarily true that just because the homeowner got the DPR that it's made its way to
So that I
HRI.
agree. That's all properties that are listed with that report, the DPR.
that have done a DPR, and we may
Mills
have to
Acts.
search.
I think it's really just complete our inventory the best we
Yes,
can,
we have to have-
continuing
Yes.
to add to the inventory.
And and this wouldn't be part of the motion because it wouldn't be part of the ordinance, but perhaps after we vote on the ordinance, we can by consensus refer back to the city manager to get a report back on how the city can complete its survey, because it's been ongoing for years and years and it's never been complete, and we need to look at how the city can complete it.
Okay, let's make that a separate motion. So we have a motion and a second on, we can actually vote on that since it's on topic. Let's memorialize it. Motion and a second. Vice Mayor Caserta, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say I do apologize that this has taken 3 years. But again, this is reflecting in you showing up and your passions heard and reflected in our decisions. Way to go.
It's been through, a couple of spin cycles at the state. I think that's really, it took us,
It was
what, a
at the state
year
for
to
the
get it
longest.
back?
Yeah. It took
Or a
the
year and a
state.
half to get it back? 2 cycles, yeah. Staff, Brian?
Yes. Since Lee is going away and Andrew's not here, and I don't really understand what we mean by 100-foot radius being added to the direction, I'd like to see if I can get a little bit more.
Property, okay.
I'd like to get clarification. Do you understand it, Lee? What that direction means?
Yes, and so maybe I'll articulate it for the council. And the direction is to refer properties when they are proposing modifications that would require a public hearing, say an architectural review hearing, that those also would go to the Historical and Landmarks Commission if they are located within 100 feet of a property that's on the Historic Resources Inventory.
So they're also going to the architectural review, and then they would, in addition, go to the historic HLC. Okay, now I got it.
In
Thank you.
advance as a recommendation.
Okay.
You're not going anywhere tomorrow, are you?
Ellie.
No, he'll still, okay.
I just wanted to make sure.
All right, you sounded like he was like leaving
Not
tonight.
leaving yet.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
During the course of drafting this ordinance, he will have left.
Make sure we get his phone number, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the floor. Let's vote on this one. Lights on the motion. And that passes unanimously. You can clap now, okay. Then Councilmember Mahan, you had another motion?
As a follow-up motion, I would move to direct the city manager to come back to the city council with a report on some means for the city to complete its survey of our historic properties.
Motion second, Councilmember O'Neill.
Just to note, it's not just the old quad. We have significant historic properties in Agnews Village, so it's not just the old quad.
Yeah, we didn't limit it to the old quad, it's the city.
The city.
As a whole.
The city.
Motion second, I'm sorry, Councilmember O'Neill?
Well, I wanted to make something about our historic preservation district, but that's
Okay.
after this.
So motion second, any discussion on this as a referral? Lights on the motion, that passes unanimously. Councilmember O'Neill?
Thank you. There has been some discussion about this at various meetings, and it's been something that's been out there for years. And I don't know if we want to, have staff or HLC look at it. I mean, there is a lot of work, it's a separate task to take on to have a historic district. And, I'm not even familiar with what all the benefits of that are. Some cities do have them, but, when folks say to me, well, I live in a historic district, I said, well, I know it has a lot of historic meaning to us, but it's not officially designated as such. So I don't know if we could have some information back on that, or if HLC wants to look at that.
Let's refer it to HLC.
And see
So
what
that's
would
right up
it
their
take
alley.
to do that, and would we qualify?
Can we, by consensus, refer that to HLC?
Yes.
Please, thank you. Councilmember Mahan? Okay.
That was going to be my suggestion, but also to involve our city historian, because I know she's done a lot of work on this already over the several years.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you all for coming on this. Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
No, you can't die now.
Get your second house, Lou, the second one, if you do, please. I need somewhere to sleep.
That was just a draft. We haven't done pass to print, okay? All right. If you could take your conversations out here, great, thank you. Our next item we have is the Freedom Circle Specific Plan Request for Council Feedback. Hold on a second. On the request for proposals for development and direction as to the timing of the Gray Star development proposal in relation to the specific plan, City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. You've seen the Gray Star proposal before, 2 or 3 years ago. In the meantime, now Irvine is also a big property owner in that area. This area is north of 101, west of San Tomas Expressway and Freedom Circle, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So we have a couple things to ask of the council tonight. Number one, that we should do the specific plan. And second thing is, should Gray Star be included in the specific plan, or can they be
dealt with as a separate project, and then when we do the specific plan, that this be treated as like a background project. So before we get to that, once again, Lee Butler has a presentation to make just to clearly show where the properties are and what the ask is. Lee?
Hi, Lee.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. So on March 21st of this year, the council hosted a study session where we discussed status update on the 2010 to 2035 general plan. And as part of that discussion, the council expressed an interest in the development of a specific plan for the Freedom Circle area that would facilitate the redevelopment of this area into a high-intensity office and high-density residential neighborhood. And tonight, we are seeking direction from the council regarding the request for proposals for that specific plan and the relationship of the timing of that specific plan with the Gray Star development proposal. The map of the area that is proposed to be included in the RFP is shown here with the Gray Star site at the southeast corner. Again, 101 Great America Parkway, the Great America Theme Park, and the San Tomas Aquino Creek as the eastern boundary there. So we have a phased general plan, as the council is aware, and we have what we call focus areas in each of the later phases, in phase 2 and phase 3, that identify areas oftentimes that are anticipated for conversion from industrial areas to residential and commercial complete neighborhoods. An important distinction for this plan area is that it is not anticipated as part of the focus areas. So this is a proposed conversion of an industrial area that's primarily high-intensity office / research and development, but some also of regional commercial designation. But there is no plan in the general plan to, even in phase 3, convert it to residential. We did get the development proposal from the Gray Star Development Company, and that kind of spurred the discussion that had the council consider that conversion. And if it were to convert, the specific plan that we have the request for proposals developed for right now and prepared to release would allow for that same high-intensity office and R&D development. And it would also facilitate a high-density residential development in combination with that, that would likely be at 100-plus DU per acre, dwelling units per acre. If the council gives direction to proceed, we would treat this as a phase 3 focus area. And the phase 3 focus areas have a whole series of prerequisite studies that would need to be completed prior to implementation of that phase 3. And I've listed a few of them here that I'll go through on this slide and the next. There would be an analysis of our parkland that would be required, an analysis of various infrastructure, wastewater, water, the storm drainage system, and so forth, energy resources, and distribution. We would also look at the fiscal health of the city, and we would evaluate police and fire services and alternative transportation as a means to reduce our vehicle miles traveled. All of that would be a part of the prerequisite studies that would need to be completed, whether this is done as a specific plan or if the Gray Star project were to move forward independently in advance of that. So we have prepared a draft request for proposals, and it was included in the packet. And there are a few key objectives of that I'd like to briefly highlight. The first is that we really want to create a complete neighborhood, one that integrates the housing and the jobs the retail and the services, the parks and the recreation opportunities, all into a cohesive whole where the public areas are inviting and vibrant and contribute to a sense of place. We want to make sure that we have an equitable plan, one that equally distributes the burdens that are associated with larger development areas like this. So infrastructure and parklands and schools or fire and police services, all of those, making sure that there is a equal share in the costs associated with the development of those resources. And then we want a plan that's feasible. We want an implementable plan. We want to be able to have a plan that we can use to facilitate the development of the vision that we include, that we develop as part of the plan. And then we want to ensure economic sustainability. And that one includes looking at fiscal sustainability as well as the economic analysis for the overall area, how much retail can be supported out there. And for this particular focus area, this provision has a special role because it is proposing this conversion of industrial lands that weren't planned for conversion. We would have an additional analysis that really looks at the resulting jobs to housing ratios and jobs housing balance that we have, as well as the fiscal implications for that. And then it would evaluate, as part of the proposed RFP, request for proposals, we would evaluate if we're converting this area, should we be looking at some other areas that maybe right now are planned for conversion, but maybe we should maintain some of those industrial jobs in those areas for a longer period of time or indefinitely. The components of the plan itself, we have the prerequisite studies that I mentioned previously. We would have a substantial amount of stakeholder and community engagement. We would have the consultant prepare a series of land use alternatives that we would vet through the community and with the council to come up with a preferred alternative and the development of a land use plan and urban design standards to guide the development in the area. And then we would evaluate what infrastructure is needed and how that would be implemented and effectuated as part of the developments. And then the RFP also includes an environmental impact report. Moving on to the Gray Star proposal at the southeast corner, you can see a rendering perspective view of what that proposal would look like. On the south end here are two office buildings that total just over 600,000 square feet. There are 4 towers on the northern portion of the site, and those would accommodate a little over 1,000 residential units. And then there would be about just under 20,000 square feet of retail, along with roughly 2.5 acres of publicly accessible open space that you can see in the central southern portion of the diagram here. The site plan actually shows that open space area a little better in the areas through here. Again, that would be publicly accessible, but it is not proposed to be dedicated as parkland. Just briefly, Gray Star is requesting to move forward in advance of the specific plan. The Gray Star development, as the city manager mentioned, was in front of the council for the first time in a study session of August of 2015, and they currently have a general plan amendment on file. They have a rezoning on file and an architectural review on file. So they are requesting to proceed in advance. The key benefit to them for that is the timing. They would have to go through many of the same studies, all of the same studies for the most part in terms of the prerequisite studies, but there is some time associated with the RFP, the bringing the consultant on board, the entering into the contract. So that would save them a number of months in time. The other side of that coin is the development of a specific plan and having the development proposal follow that. And that would really allow for a more comprehensive look at the entire area and how the infrastructure and retail and service needs would be distributed throughout that entire area. And so that's the balancing act that we're asking the council to provide direction on this evening. And so with that, we are recommending that the council provide any comments that you may have on the RFP, as well as provide us with direction to proceed on that and direction as to the timing of the Greystar proposal in relation to that specific plan development.
Thank you. Before we go to cards, I have some lights on the dais. Vice Mayor Caserta.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, Lee, you kind of hit the balancing act here and the two sides of the coin. Now, I do know Greystar has come to us and their original vision, they listened to our comments, and I definitely saw changes in that. My question is, what's our precedent, our previous decision-making on letting something go ahead of the SP, for example?
So, if you look at the Santa Clara Square development and that overall area, that was also a phase 3 proposal. Excuse me, I should say a phase 3 focus area in the general plan. So that phase 3 focus area moved forward in advance. That's scheduled for 2023. I think one of the distinctions there is just the sheer size of the area that was controlled by that landowner. And so there is that distinction there. For Lawrence Station Area Plan, we processed the projects concurrently, but we did wait until the specific plan was completed before approving projects. And with Tasman East, we're actually waiting on the development proposals.
You're saying it's a mixed bag?
Generally, but it is, the one example where we moved forward was a substantially larger area.
Now, obviously, whatever we do, whether it's Sobrato, Irvine, Greystar, there's going to be expenditures on their part to improve infrastructure, et cetera. My question is, if we move forward with what Greystar desires, is there equity in what they would be paying versus us waiting with an SP, or are they getting a discounted rate? I'm just trying to find a balancing part, and I know, we don't want to see developers pitted against each other. I know they've talked and stuff, so that's positive. So I'm just wondering on that last question.
Sure, and so that's a loaded question, but it's tough to determine because we don't know what level of infrastructure we're going to need for the overall development. And so when you study that overall plan area, you can evaluate, okay, does there need to be upgrades to the sanitary sewer system or the water conveyance? There may be an opportunity if the council wanted to facilitate that development in an earlier cycle, an earlier timeline, then we would certainly recommend the inclusion of a development agreement that could help to address some of those potential infrastructure costs that we may not know at this time, but we could help defray some of those costs. But there are a lot of things.
Mechanisms to ameliorate some of the concerns that free ride is happening or anything like that?
A development agreement would be one of those, and then if there were, for example, a future community facilities district, then there could be conditions of approval and provisions in that development agreement that would require participation in future community facilities
And I'll stop
districts.
drinking before meetings with my loaded questions. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, if I could just add, ideal situation, if we were to just start from scratch, would be a specific plan. But in this case, obviously, you're asking the question about Greystar because they've been here before. Even with development agreements and other things, it's still a little bit of speculation, like what all will be needed for the whole area and whether it's equally divided or not. So while it can be accommodated as best as we can, but ideally, specific plan is the right way to go.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
And that's kind of what I want to say to you, Lee. We got hit with El Camino Real, and that was kind of like piecemeal together. And I believe that we need to go to a specific plan for that area because we have that job housing ratio and balance that other cities just don't seem to like about us. But I think this piece of property and in that area, we have light industrial and the conversion rates and what we can and cannot do there. So when I saw that you wanted some comments about this, I kind of like the idea of hiring, do the RFP for consultant services, kind of like what we did on the other side with Lawrence. And I think it would be beneficial to everyone to kind of work with us to make sure that we don't have any more of that crazy stuff going on. Whether we like it or don't like it or whatever, at least we'd agree upon any traffic mitigations or things that had to be done, connectability of parks and open space. And I think, and now that we're looking into public, spaces and open spaces, that, we take a lot more of this into consideration. So I don't really want to jump the gun. So I really would like to go with a specific plan idea and make sure that we cover all our bases this time instead of knee-jerking thing. And to go with Irvine, that was a super block. That was like a whole area that was specifically planned just by one company, but it was well thought out in a lot of aspects. And it did give us what we needed, and it's been a success because people really like what's out there right now. So I think we need to look at this holistically and not piecemeal. So those are my recommendations or comments to you.
Thank you. Councilmember Colstead.
Thanks, Mayor. I have one question right off the bat, Mr. Butler. I thought this Freedom Circle specific plan was going to be the Irvine parcel, the Gray Star parcel, and the Sobrato parcel. But in looking at your little map here, it kind of looks like it's gobbling up the McCandless property and the Marriott property and those towers that are right between McCandless and Marriott. Are they planning something also?
So we could, for example, I think the reason why we took this approach is because we've got an adjacency and some natural boundaries with large arterial roads, Great America Parkway. We could end up with a specific plan that recommends, for example, that the hotel remain on that property, or that that be used for hotel purposes in perpetuity with intensification. And so just the inclusion of those doesn't necessarily mean the change, but I think we want to include that area as part of the planning process to make sure that we are giving due consideration to how that whole area would interact with the uses that either are going to remain or redevelop.
Councilmember Colstead, just to add to that, like Marriott Hotel, I mean, as we know, it's an old structure. And potentially they could, if they don't rebuild, they could expand. There's a potential. So this could also help us with that determination, the infrastructure, what can it support in that area, and that guides us for their expansion.
But right now, there's no deal on the table from Marriott or McCandless or that other property owner that has the office towers.
That's correct. The only application that we have on file is the Gray Star application.
Okay. Now, secondly, I'd like to go to page 4 of the staff report, and it's paragraph 2, 3, and 4, the bottom 3 paragraphs. It looks like you took the good points and the bad points of this suggestion and picked each one of them apart and explained to us in detail what would happen if the project went each way. And I guess my question is, when you crafted this deal with the applicants, did everybody sign off that this was a acceptable solution on all sides of the table?
So that's a question that you can ask of the applicant themselves. I know that, you know, they're interested in moving forward. Greystar is in advance. And we've tried to provide both the pros and the cons in our analysis.
And it looks like you've crafted a deal that allows Greystar, that could allow Greystar to proceed with their application, but hold them accountable for some of the infrastructure improvements going forward. That might be an obligation to all of the developers out there.
So if the council chooses to allow Greystar to move forward, we put in some recommendations that we think would potentially allow it to be more equitable. We don't know, for example, what the overall parkland requirements would be out there, or whether a school may be necessary and so forth, and that would be a part of the larger study. But there are some things that we recommended that could make that more equitable if Greystar were moving forward in advance.
Now, and my last comment is, this scenario, although it's a different use, it's not R1 or multiple dwellings like the ones on the El Camino, but we just took 4 or 5 projects that were in the pipeline and told you and the staff to proceed with those and do the El Camino specific project simultaneously with their construction. If we did this, this would be similar precedent to the one we already set on the El Camino. We would allow one developer to go forward and do the area specific plan simultaneously. Is that right?
That's a similar example, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Mahan?
Yes, how long would the specific plan take? I mean, you're talking about the contract being awarded possibly in October, but after that, how long would the process take?
So typically about the fastest you can do a specific plan is about 18 months when there's an EIR involved and all the public outreach. With this, you know, we would anticipate an 18 to 24 month time frame is fairly typical.
And this is one of the areas we've been looking at, much like the Irvine project on Bowers, that was going to be in some future phase identified for housing, correct? And much like that, the Irvine project, we just brought it forward to build the housing now because we need it. How many housing units are going on the Greystar project?
So 2 things. One, this area is not included as part of the phase 3, so it's not anticipated for conversion in any phase of the general plan. But the specific plan could modify. We would include general plan amendments that could change those future plans. And there are 1,018.
Yeah.
So that's why Greystar has applied for a general plan amendment, is to build the housing on that site.
That's correct, right.
Okay. And then, so what other methods would there be for cost sharing for the entire specific plan for a project that went in sooner than the specific plan was created?
So the development agreement is certainly one, and having contributions as part of that towards future improvements as part of the overall specific plan. One of the challenges there is not knowing upfront what the costs of those infrastructure improvements would be, or what the total number of residential units and therefore what the total amount of parkland should be, as an example. So there are mechanisms, the Community Facilities District and conditioning that they participate in a future Community Facilities District for infrastructure improvements. That could be one, assuming that a CFD was formed for those infrastructure improvements in the future.
So you wouldn't necessarily have to know the exact cost of those items now to get a contribution, but you could get sort of the promise to pay as the whole specific plan area developed. Is that what you're saying?
We would have to segregate those 2 out for the development agreement. We would have to look at carefully crafting language in coordination with our attorneys to either identify specific costs or to identify future contributions. If it were a CFD, the Community Facilities District, that would at some point in the future identify the costs of the infrastructure improvements and then allocate a fair share proportion to all of the
share.
Yeah, all of the.
Councilman Mahan, to be candid, there'll be a little more risk on Gray Star because we'll have to try to cover the future costs that we don't know at this point.
Right.
So they'll be sort of agreeing to participate in CFD without really knowing what the extent of their contribution may or may not be.
Right, but the risk is on them.
Yes.
Okay. Do we know if any of the other property owners in that specific plan area are planning to develop soon or redevelop soon?
So we've had conversations with two of the property owners. The Irvine Company owns the area in the center of the Freedom Circle. And so this entire portion here. And then Sobrato owns much of the area on the north side of Mission College Boulevard. And so we have had conversations with them. They have been supportive of the specific plan process. I know Irvine's here. They can let you know their timing, but they don't have anything on file. They do have tenants in there right now. Certainly, I would say that Gray Star is in more of a hurry as compared to the conversations that we've had, but there is absolutely interest on the part of both Irvine and Sobrato.
But we don't know in what time frame? I mean, there's existing buildings there, and you say there's tenants, and do we know the length of time on those tenancies or any of that to get some
So
judgment?
Irvine could speak to the length of time on the tenancies. I know there are various ways of moving. Irvine owns a lot of property. They could move tenants around. So even if a tenant has a longer lease, and Sobrato, for them, even if there's a tenant there, those structures actually may remain. And then, for example, if we had high-intensity offices that remain, there could be the development of a residential tower, for example, on an adjacent part of the property. So just an intensification of the use. They wouldn't necessarily have to move their tenant out. They would just need to facilitate their operations during the construction.
And before Gray Star made its applications, was there any thought by council that this area would be subject to a specific plan?
No, there was not a consideration of this area. There was a preliminary review. I should correct myself there because there was a preliminary review back in 2015 that proposed residential on this site, and the council provided feedback. And Gray Star came back with a slightly larger site and added the 600,000 square feet of office uses in conjunction with a higher density residential project.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Watanabe. Councilmember Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I mean, I understand why Gray Star would be anxious or in a hurry. I know that they've had this plan. They presented their plans, for quite a while now, since 2015. It's before my time, but I'm familiar with what's happened in the past. However, living up in that area and knowing what's happening right now with, you've got the Patrick Henry specific plan that we just approved. We've got Tasman East. There's just a lot going on in that area, and we don't know what the impact is going to be, I feel like, on the entire area as a result. And it just seems to me that it would be advantageous to take a holistic approach to the development and to focus on a specific plan for that area, incorporating Gray Star along with Irvine and the other developers in the area, and because of how it is going to impact the infrastructure as well as just the communities around there. So me personally, I feel like it would be more advantageous to focus on a specific plan for the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you. So I did read the letter that came in from the Sobrato organization, and I knew they owned a couple of parcels there. I didn't realize how much they had that they owned from the picture that the visual that they provided. And actually, I think at one of the recent council meetings, I had suggested whether we wanted to maybe expand the area of this specific plan. And in the Sobrato letter that they advocated, or they kind of proposed a boundary that goes all the way up to 237, 101, quite more expansive. Would it, by any chance, considering the properties that are there, and the concerns about timelines, if instead of doing 2 or 3 smaller specific plans, would it be more time effective or less expensive for everybody involved if we were to perhaps look at the idea that the Sobrato organization presented and do one large specific plan?
So it's a good question. I think for the benefit of the council and then the public, the Sobrato letter essentially has everything west of the creek over to the city boundaries and north of 101, looking at that entire area as a potential planned area. And that is a really large endeavor. And a couple of comments that I would make regarding that. One, I think one of the real assets that the city of Santa Clara has is its employment base in terms of its funding our fiscal solvency. And there is incredible pressure constantly to convert lands, and having a plan that is going to incorporate that entire area, I would say it would do 2 things. One, it would put additional pressure on the conversion of some of our key employment areas. And 2, when you get into studying areas of that size, you can really get into very large infrastructure improvements that you may not otherwise encounter in smaller plans. So that can add cost burdens to development. So just 2 cautionary points about that type of approach. I think the other benefit of the approach that we're currently pursuing, and we released an RFP yesterday in response to council's direction last week on the Patrick Henry focus area, is that if the timing of those were to separate a little bit, for example, this plan area has some more of the fiscal analysis, some more detailed jobs housing analysis, because it isn't included as part of a phase 3 focus area. So that additional analysis likely would take a little bit more time. So, we have at least 1 developer in the other area, and really more than that in the Patrick Henry area, that are interested in moving forward, and tying them together could result in a slower process for both.
Okay, great, thank you. So my other question, I know that the Gray Star folks, they had an initial presentation to council a couple years ago, and they came back with some of the, the drawings that you included in your presentation. And, I think they've done a lot of, they've got some good ideas. I know for that type of project, an EIR would be required, and for this specific plan, an EIR would be required. Would, in terms of the amount of time that the process is going to take, because I don't believe that they've started the EIR process yet. I'm sure they're waiting to find out what's going on there. I wouldn't imagine that they would start that. So if we were to approve this and if we could work as quickly as we could on the RFP process, could we limit or maybe make it so that Gray Star would not be if we did like an EIR for the entire area, that actually their project could move along somewhat, in a reasonable time frame and not be, I think I've heard them say that they have concerns that maybe it could be delayed a couple of years. I mean, if we were to go ahead now and get the EIR going for the whole area, would you have a thought about, what kind of delay would we be talking about for them? Based on where they are with what they've done so far?
I'll attempt to answer that. The only difference would be, yes, I mean, if they move individually, they will be faster by a few months, in the sense that if we do the EIR, it's just our process that may add 3-4 months to the overall
RFP to get the
RFP, and whereas Gray Star can just go to any good consultant on our list and they can start the process. So that's where they could gain some time. And then otherwise, EIR process, yes, again, individual project versus overall, there's more to be looked at, so there's few months to be added there. So overall, they could gain, I could venture to guess, maybe 4 to 6 months if they were to proceed individually.
And to kind of to amplify, and just what you said, so if we're doing the RFP, though, we have more control over like the consultants that are chosen, as opposed to if the developer's doing it, then we don't really have any say. Or do we have any say about who they
We generally tell them who has worked with the city before. We don't specify a consultant. We tell them which are the consultants out there who have worked with the city and who are familiar with our processes. Then the developer can select one of those.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Lee, I have a few questions. First of all, looking at this Freedom Circle specific plan area, it looks like there is possibly 4 major landowners that could look at redeveloping their properties or developing their properties, and that would be Gray Star, Sobrato, Irvine, and the Marriott Corporation with the hotel, because I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that they're going to do something with that property that was built in the 70s. It's going to be upgraded, updated. That in terms of the McCandless Towers and those properties there, it will probably be a little while before they're adding on, but who knows? I mean, that's probably at least more in the future than those 4 properties that are owned. Is that correct? Is there other smaller properties in there? Because to me, it looks like those are the 4 major property owners.
They are large properties. I do not know if the property here is also owned. So
I don't know. One of them is McCandless. I don't know if they own both, but those are ones that are.
Sobrato's in there.
Sobrato's across Mission College Boulevard.
Sobrato owns across
Irvine's
Mission
everything in the middle, and Marriott's on the corner there, the Marriott Hotel. So I know this was our opportunity with a specific plan to actually be proactive, to do something, and to plan that area responsibly, because when Gray Star came to us in August of 2015, they came with a residential project, and the council unanimously said no. And that's the last, actual project that it come before the council at one of our kick the tire special study session meetings, mainly because we had no services there. It wasn't planned in any phase of the general plan, and so we had issues with it. So we just sent it back. So that was 2 years ago. So for me, it looks like, they have a project now, but it sounds like it's in the beginning of the process where by the time we get our specific plan going, we may add a couple of months on to the process, but it's in the beginning, because I'm telling you, if the Gray Star project is taken out and comes separately, one of the questions we had, many questions that we had in August 2015, we still have, which is, What about the open space? What about the access? What about public safety? How are we going to get there? What about the schools? How are you going to service the residents that are there? I remember one of the things, how do you get your residents to services? And they said, oh, they'll use the Creek Trail to get to the Irvine Santa Clara Square grocery store. But, you know, that was not practical. So those same questions we're still going to have. So I would imagine if it were included as part of the specific plan, which is what we're doing, then we can equitably look at all of those, especially those 4 major landowners, to talk about what about the parks, what about the schools, what about, you know, all the public infrastructure that we're going to need, and look at it equitably around. So I appreciate that Gray Star is trying to come forward, but for 2 years, they've land banked that property for 2 years. And so they haven't even started their EIR yet. So I think we could do it concurrently. We can do it concurrently and do it as quickly as we can, because I read the staff report, and a lot of the timing, I think it's because of our shortage of staff and amount of work that needs to be done, and, you know, the other specific plans we're working on and those kinds of things. But if we could supplement staff to move it along so it's all done concurrently, so we don't have to take a, if we don't have to make a development agreement that puts in all these what ifs for all of these costs in the future and start piling them onto Gray Star, you know, that's inequitable to what may happen if we go the specific plan. So I'm more in favor of looking at the specific plan because it's the first time we actually can be proactive in planning an area that we had never planned to have residential in that area. So timing-wise, is it possible that we can shave as much off of the specific plan process so that we can handle this development along with the others that I know will be coming forward? Sorry, that's a long, drawn out.
Certainly we can, and I think it's one of the things that we can stress in the RFP to the consultants, and really when the interview process goes forward and we've got that short list of consultants, we can really stress and ensure that they can provide us examples of where they've delivered projects on time, and large projects such as this as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Mahan, you have more questions?
Just a clarification. So what would it mean to say those things could go forward concurrently?
Well, we don't pull it out separately. We just go with our specific plan process.
But you're saying their EIR could go forward concurrently?
No, I think the suggestion was to expedite our specific plan EIR process.
Not 2 EIRs, one.
One.
Because my thought was if we're going to pull this side out, I'm wondering, should we even do a specific plan? Just a thought, because it sort of defeats the whole purpose of the specific plan. Anyways, I have cards from the audience. If you'd like to, we'll start that. So Kurt Vartan, and then Dan Diebel.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I was encouraged to see that you're looking at a specific plan for this and looking at turning some of your commercial space into residential. One thing, it looks like I saw 1,000 residents. It's like a lot of residents. That's great. But when I saw you have combined that with 600,000 feet of office, I did some quick math, and that's just under 4,000 workers. And we're talking about 1,000 residences. So you're not actually helping your jobs housing ratio. You're actually making it worse. So what if you flipped it around and maybe had encouraged them to do more residential here, and you start developing a residential community? So with that, I'd like to ask for, I looked in your RFP in Section A, add placemaking complete streets into the introduction. In Section E, there's a shall include the formation of a stakeholder steering group comprised of property owners and developers. I'd appreciate it if you could add community members, including community-based groups. And also in Section E, there's may include the formation of a technical advisory committee, a TAC. TAC, quote, may be formed, yet three deliverables, 1B, 1C, 4C, and Section F include the TAC. So if it's may, why are we having deliverables that depend on that? Also, community members should be involved in this process. The current development process is pretty broken, and allowing the community to be part of the TAC and be a voice for the process will go a long way to get early buy-in and engagement with all interested parties. So those are some specific things. I just wanted to get those on record as things that I think are missing in the RFP, and I hope that it really engages community. I also want to stress that it's critical that companies like Greystar be expedited in a process like this. And if you have a specific plan, that as soon as that specific plan is done, it like lights the fuse so these guys can go and not put a whole bunch of burdens and delays, because that's really what we need these guys to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan? And then Peter Say after that.
Good
Welcome.
evening. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Based on the discussion you've already had tonight of changing my comments a little bit, we have been at this process for a couple of years. There has been some changes in our plans and land acquisition and things like that, but also some delays that we've experienced just through the process. And for example, this time we filed an application in February, and then at the end of March we started this discussion about a specific plan, which puts everything on hold. But we, respectfully request that that you approve our request to move forward. We would be willing and eager to participate in a comprehensive plan. We would be prepared to pay for the prerequisite studies that for all the environmental work, the retail feasibility, and would be willing to enter into a development agreement to pay our fair share of any of the infrastructure costs, should that be something that the council would go along with. I guess we believe that those studies would eliminate the infrastructure needs, which we would pay for in our fair share to ensure the equity that has been raised throughout this process. So we just like to move forward with providing housing in Santa Clara. And I think one thing that hasn't been discussed tonight, and that is just kind of the overall workload of the planning department with the numerous specific plans that you have going on. So I don't think that in a few months that this specific plan for Freedom Circle would advance as quickly as I've heard tonight, and I think that's our biggest concern. We are in full favor of a holistic approach to the neighborhood. We just think that we'd like to move forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter? And then Carlene Matchniff. Good evening.
Good evening. Mayor Gilmore, members of the council, thank you for your time this evening. My name is Peter Tsai. I'm with the Sobrato organization. As a longtime member of the community, Sobrato is interested in the long-term continued success of Santa Clara and this area. As Council Member O'Neill had said, we would pose the option of studying a larger area that would include Freedom Circle. It would include Lay Echo, the Patrick Henry specific plan that you guys authorized last week. We believe that this area in Santa Clara could be studied holistically and try to find the right balance of uses and densities in the area. If planned properly, this could really be a placemaking location and a destination for not just Santa Clara, but all of Silicon Valley. Sobrato is eager to participate in such a process along with our neighbors. And lastly, just want to conclude with, the adjacency with all these large developments together. I think it's important to look at the cumulative effects it will have on the city's resources. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Carlene. And then Andrew Boone after that. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Gilmore, members of the City Council. I'm Carlene Matchniff, Vice President of Entitlements for the Irvine Company, and I'm also registered under your city lobbying ordinance. On behalf of Irvine, I want to express our willingness to participate in this new specific plan process. As a stakeholder, as a property owner, and we own 26 acres right in the center of the specific plan area. We wrote a letter dated May 30th, which really indicated all of the issues that we laid out of our concerns. We really feel like you have an opportunity here. This is a blank slate. It's an empty canvas when you look at it from an urban planning standpoint. And I think that you need to, as we heard during many of the hearings that we've participated in, how do these kinds of planning efforts impact city services, schools, parks, open spaces? And now we have an opportunity to look at connectivity and linkage to the San Tomas Creek Trail and bicycle lanes where they go, where you need to go. And so if we are pre-constrained, then that limits those opportunities. And I think that that's something that you have before you. We need to look at a range of housing densities as well. So, spreading the cost of all the additional infrastructure and services should be done equitably, and we need to understand the phasing of those services and parks and everything through the build out of this specific plan. And will they be available, for the residents and the employment when they're needed? I want to make a couple of corrections. The Santa Clara Square area was not envisioned as a specific plan. It was an assemblage, and it was in the future focus area. So we put that together and initiated bringing that forward, meeting all the prerequisites of the general plan. This area has not been in the future focus area. It needs to meet those prerequisites, and we want to be part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
Good evening. My name is Andrew Boone. I think that it does make sense to go ahead with a specific plan rather than, breaking off a chunk of this area as its own development. But secondly, I think the most important issue is how much housing gets included. As Mr. Vartan pointed out, 600,000 square feet of office space with only 1,000 housing units makes your jobs housing balance worse than it is now, which is already bad. 600,000 square feet is 3,000 to 4,000 workers, and there's not going to be 3,000 to 4,000 people living in 1,000 units. It does a disservice to everybody else who's trying to rent in Santa Clara or who's trying to rent in the region by causing further upward pressure on rents. There should be at least twice as many housing units for such large office space development, which is what this is. The other critical issue, it's just a simple design issue, is how does it connect to the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail? It's not good enough just to be next to the trail. You have to be able to get from those offices and those housing units to the trail. So it's right next to it. It's flat. You can just have a couple of entrances coming from the trail into the development, and that should be a requirement of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward?
Hello again, Mayor, City Council, Scott Lane here. But you know me, sorry for the people that are watching. This is fantastic. These stationary plans are things that we've been saying for I don't know how many years, and you've been hearing ad nauseum. So I understand that you're catch-22 because Graystar has been in here in the process. If you get a really big specific area plan, it's going to be even more complicated, which may take longer. So there's unintended and intended consequences of whatever you choose. I also would just want to point out that if you made exceptions for the El Camino plan and had 4 developers and you don't allow it here, is this one more chance where the city of Santa Clara can be sued for a lack of consistency? I hope not. But I do like what they're wanting to do. I agree that our job housing imbalance of all the cities in the north part of the county is totally different than San Jose. I want to respect that, which is why San Jose is suing us. I'm not sure about the veracity of that lawsuit, but I welcome making specific area plans. This is something we've been talking about for years. How do we do it? Where's the balance? I do share the concern if we come too far forward with Greystar, does that affect it? Having said that, if they come up with such a plan that is so outrageously over the park, fantastic, then obviously that's a different incentive. That's part of the judgment call. But I think anything that you can do to broaden the reach of the community in here, to make it more amenable so they're part of this process, I think you'll end up with a better outcome and a better process throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. We are finally doing the infrastructure plan we've talked about for probably the last 3 years. It is wonderful we woke up. Too bad it took 3 years. I think we need to not proceed with the Greystar, to put in 600,000 square feet of office, plus another 18,000, I think it was, of retail, and only 1,000 housing units. I'm just paralyzed with amazement that the planning department would even let that get onto a screen. What are they thinking? Do they not know we have a housing imbalance? They keep preaching it, and here's an area it's not going to have the impact. I mean, we're back to who's working for whom. I mean, I just don't understand how that even gets moved forward. And the fact that Greystar initially came in with a high-density project, and now it's almost a joke to put up something with 1,000 units. It's an insult to anybody's intelligence to do that. And then to say, we were here before, so we get a hall pass, that should have a big hell no, because you had high density, now you have a joke of 1,000 units. So that should speak for itself. I mean, Irvine has done a really great job of addressing and being very generous in what they've brought forward in schools and ever. We're talking about whole communities. Here's our chance to do it right, where we're going to look at infrastructure, schools, transportation, the whole enchilada. Please don't screw it up. Do it right. For the very first time, do it right. And let's start doing every project right, where we look at what we're going to have for trade-offs and everything else. Thank you and amen.
Yeah. Hassan?
Hey, Hassan, how are you here? Councilmember Kolstad mentioned, something in his line of questioning. He mentioned a comment about how, we set precedent with what happened in El Camino, trying to justify, approving Greystar here. The reality is, you guys all approved what the discussion was about on El Camino specific plan, is that you guys said, up on the council, you said, you other developments, the ones that are still in the pipeline, are moving forward at your own risk. We still have 100% purview to approve or deny your project. And if we feel like it's not going to, mesh with the El Camino specific plan, that we're not going to approve it. So proceed at your own risk. That's a very different situation than approving this plan or approving them to break off from having to conform with the specific area plan for this development. And the reality is, like, we've seen this, especially those of us who've come here on several meetings, that this doesn't seem like planning. It seems like procrastinating. Everybody they've been sitting on this for 2 years, and then they wait to the last second to make their proposal and say, please, 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 we want to move fast. Well, you had 2 years to move fast. Don't come now and say you want to move fast, and then you break off from the rest of the specific plan. It's just like, the contracts that they're going to expire next week. Well, you had so long to sit and review them. Why are you waiting to the last second? So, at the end of the day, we're trying to look for something holistic. They're not really saving that much time because they have to make their own EIR anyways. And if they go as part of the specific area plan, then they can piggyback off of whatever studies are done for that. So I really think that you should keep them as part of the entire specific plan and not expedite them for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Councilmember Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to make a motion that we propose the process and the scope for the specific plan and to hire put out the RFPs for a consultant to look at this holistically and move forward with that, and everything just kind of rolls in plan. So that's my motion.
Okay, motion second, stay with the specific plan. Any discussion, Councilmember Mahan?
I'm assuming you're not taking these two recommendations separately. I certainly support going forward with a specific plan, but I also would support allowing Greystar to proceed. So I would like to bifurcate that motion, just so I can have my vote on record, for no other reason.
What do you mean proceed in what?
Maybe you can clarify your motion, Councilmember Davis.
Okay, so if I would like to put the request for the RPs out for the consultant services, but Greystar would have to stay within that specific plan. I mean, I don't know.
Is that part of your motion?
Yes.
Okay. What
Well,
about the second?
The point
Are you
is,
all
I
right
want to vote
with
in
the
favor
second?
of the going forward with a specific plan in that area. There's two
Okay,
different recommendations here. To review and comment on the specific plan and provide directions to the timing of the Greystar development. I'm just asking to take those separately so
Okay,
that.
Councilmember Davis?
Okay, then
Start
I
with
will
the
take them
specific
separate,
plan.
yeah. To move forward with the scope of this specific plan, to put out the draft RFPs for the consultant services.
Lights on the motion? And that passes unanimously. And the second part of your motion, Councilmember Davis?
And then secondly, that the Greystar application will stay in that specific plan process.
Okay. And the motion second to include the Greystar with the rest of the property owners in the specific plan.
Correct.
Motion second, Councilmember Mahan?
Yes, I just did want to comment that I just think in the interest of fairness, they've come this far. It's likely that the specific plan is going to include these kinds of things. We need the housing sooner than later. It seems to me that there's a lot of planning going on in Santa Clara and not a lot of building. I think they should be able to move forward. The specific plan can take up to 24 months. That's another 2 years before we get one house built out there, any housing out there in order to serve the workers that are out there. And I just think it's too long for them to have to wait.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to include Greystar with the specific planning process. Lights on the motion? Debbie, did you vote against your own motion?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, my
Okay,
gosh.
clear the lights. just
so sorry.
asking.
Oh, my God.
All right, one more time.
I hit the wrong button. Sorry, I'm asleep over here.
And that,
4-2.
Councilmember
Is that-
Caserta, Vice Mayor, are you voting on this? Okay, let me clear the lights one more time. Sorry, guys. And that passes 5-2. Did you get that, City Clerk? Okay, thank you.
God.
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Ron, I was sleeping.
All right, next we have setting
Mayor.
Stady Authority meeting dates for the balance of the year.
Mayor, I have a request.
Yes.
Before we go to that item, if I could just take 1 minute to recognize,
absolutely.
Lee Butler once again. I know everyone talked about it.
You're not leaving.
We said he's going, but we never
This
said
is his
where
last
he's going.
council meeting with the city of Santa Clara. And very quickly and briefly, Lee has been with us since January of 2016. An excellent find for the city of Santa Clara. He's contributed a lot, a great planner, and this is a great opportunity for him. We are sad to see him go, but good for him and his family. He lives in Santa Cruz, and he is going to be the Director of Community Development in the city of Santa Clara. So wanted to wish him all the best and thank him.
Can we Skype you in? Can we Skype you in?
Congratulations, Lee. Your quality of life will improve dramatically without that commute.
No traffic.
So you've earned it, so congratulations. And we're sorry to see you go. We really will miss you. I know you really connected well with the public You were very friendly, answered questions, and I know there'll be a lot of people that really miss you. So thank you for your wonderful work in Santa Clara. And we're going to keep you here all night long, so
Yes.
hopefully that's okay. So you always remember us, all right? Congratulations. All right, thank you, City Manager, for pointing that out. All right, next we have
Stadium Authority.
Stadium Authority meeting dates. I think we have a few meeting dates there, and we always reserve the right to add more if we need
Yes.
them. Okay.
Move approval?
Is there a motion? Oh, is that Council Member or Stadium Authority Member Mahan?
Yes.
Mayor, just to clarify for the public before you vote, yeah, thank you for approving this calendar for the rest of the year, but August 24th is a Thursday, so only one meeting will be on Thursday, the rest are on Tuesdays.
Right, and we wanted to add that because if we didn't add that Thursday, we wouldn't meet till the end of September.
Correct.
And we're hoping that the audit will be
Yes.
ready by then.
Yeah,
for
so there
that
are several
particular
items
meeting.
lined up for
Yes,
that,
thank
yeah.
you. Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any discussion or any comments from the audience? Okay. Oh, one card. Oh, it's on this. Oh, I'm so sorry, Scott Lane. Okay, go for it. Great.
Go for it. Yay.
Lights on the motion, and that passes with Stadium Authority Member Kolstad. Apparently,
He just left.
he left with a briefcase, so he's probably not coming back. So, thank you. Okay, next we have approval of, let me get here, sorry. Okay, bids and proposals. Approval of appropriations in the amount of $100,000 from the Expendable Trust Fund Community Service Police account and award the Public Works contract for the police facility security improvements projects to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder, Gonzalez and Strong Construction Company, Inc., in the amount of $477,000, and authorization for the city manager to execute any and all documents associated with the project and change orders up to 10% of the original contract price, or $47,700, for a total not to exceed amount of $524,700.
Move the
City
staff
manager?
recommendation.
There's a motion and a second. Did you have anything, any comments, City Manager, on
No,
this?
Mayor, we went through an RFP and Gonzalez and Strong were the only bidders, but they are very qualified for this kind of work. And in our research, we found that other contractors, I mean, we started with about 50 total, and then, fewer came to the pre-bid walkthrough, but at the end, only one bid was received. But they're well qualified, and other contractors supposedly are busy because of the development going on within the county and in these kind of areas of work. So that's why staff is recommending approval.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan, your light's on.
Sorry.
Any questions? All right, any members of the audience? 22B. That's 22B. Okay, lights on the motion? And that passes unanimously for those on the dais. Okay, next we have award of the Public Works contract number 204D for the electric utilities substructure and aerial fiber optic cable master construction agreement to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Dalio Inc., in an amount not to exceed $2 million per year for a total not to exceed $6 million over the 3-year term, and authorization for the city manager to execute any and all documents associated with this project. City manager, and I do have a card on this one.
I would
no,
move
not this one.
Staff recommendation.
Motion for staff recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any comments, city manager, on this?
No, Mayor, unless you have any questions.
Okay. I don't have any questions. Is there any member of the audience? Okay, seeing none. Lights on the motion. And that passes with 5 votes, 2 missing from the dais. Thank you. All right, next we have boards and commissions for action, Civil Service Commission minutes of July 10th, request to note and file, and there's also a recommendation to approve modified job specification and exam waiting for principal engineering aid, civil modified job specifications for electric and water systems operator, electrical estimator and senior library assistant, modified job specification and recruitment type for chief storekeeper, and change in job description title and modified job specification for senior tree trimmer.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the recommendation and note and file the minutes?
Yes.
Is that what that was?
Yes.
Okay. Motion and a second.
Second.
Bless you. Any comments? Lights on the motion, and that passes unanimously of those on the dais.
Dominic's back.
Okay, report. I'm going to take my report regarding the conference I attended after the Charter Review Committee. I know there's a lot of people still sitting here. So reports of members and special committees. So I'm going to go to 22B, 2017 Charter Review Committee recommendations. 1, elect city council members by 2 districts and with 3 council members representing each district. 2, elect the 3 council members at the same time per district, alternating between gubernatorial and presidential election years. 3, utilize ranked choice voting by means of a single transferable vote as soon as the Santa Clara County Register of Voters Office can support such a system. Continue with the city's current plurality voting method until the county can support the new voting method. And 4, transition to include in 2018, elect 2 members to 4-year terms in District A, and in 2020, elect 1 member to a 2-year term in District A, and 3 members to 4-year terms in District B, and direction to the city manager and the interim city attorney to follow up with implementation steps. Before we go to the chair of the committee, city attorney, would you like to make comments?
I was going to defer to the city attorney.
Yes.
Yes, Madam Mayor and council members. First of all, I'd like to commend the committee. They did a lot of work. This was many, many hours and many hard discussions, and we really chewed this one over quite a bit. We received a lot of information, a lot of input from the public and from interest groups, and this was not an easy recommendation to get to. Unlike previous recommendations from previous committees, this was not originally a consensus vote, so there were definitely differences of opinion about how to do this, but this is what the committee ultimately came up with. I did want to note that the recommendation would be to take these recommendations from the committee and then to direct the city attorney with whatever direction you have in terms of to actually draft a charter amendment for you to then consider later in the year for or actually sometime before March of 2018 for the June 2018 ballot. And so that any charter amendment that you would consider tonight for me to draft, you would then have another opportunity to consider in final form before you requested the county to put it on the ballot for 2018. And then if it passes in 2018, in June of 2018, then this would be the effective charter provision for the election in November of 2018 and elections after that.
Can I ask you, City Attorney, would there be time, it sounds like there probably would be, assuming the council moves ahead with the recommendation that we send it back first to the Charter Review Committee to look at it before coming back to the council? Because I would like to, since they did all the work, that they're able to look at it again.
Would you like the draft to come through them first before it came back here?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Just so, because it's their brainchild.
And just so the committee knows, I won't be able to do that by next Monday.
No. Just because we're on a break doesn't mean you're on a break, right? Okay. Vice Mayor Casser, do you have a question?
If this is appropriate during the presentation, I just had one quick question. I know we're going to get to the ranked voting systems and all that. Mr. City Attorney, was there discussions, assuming there's multiple candidates running for mayor, of doing that as well for the mayoral race?
There was
because
there was some disagreement about what they thought that they were supposed to be doing for next week's. There is one more committee hearing or committee meeting scheduled, and there was some discussion of whether they should take up that topic of whether we should change the voting methodology for the mayor and the two other elected positions that are currently in the charter. And frankly, I'm not prepared really to give much legal advice on that issue. We have not been sued on whether there's something wrong with the way we elect our mayor in terms of whether there should be some kind of ranked choice voting. And I don't know how much advice we can give on that issue to get it.
Maybe Mr. Silva can mention that in his comments
Okay.
too, because.
So I'm just saying it's a different consideration, because when you hear the presentation on when you have 3 candidates running and how that type of a voting system might work for 3 candidates, that's a different question when you only have one office to fill with multiple candidates. So the system would work differently for the mayor. And the one experience I know Oakland does their mayor that way, and
AV system, yeah,
through a different system, and we haven't really had much chance to analyze those systems and give much advice on that. So,
yeah, Tina, maybe you can mention that in your comments here.
Sure. So first, yeah, we can get to that because there was a little point of contention.
And your name
I
for
think.
the record, please?
Oh, Tino Silva. Sorry. It's been a long
Yeah, we don't
day.
know you.
So first, I want to thank the committee, because as the city attorney said, everybody really did work extremely hard. There was, being chair of this committee was actually humbling, because there were so many smart people, so many different valid points of view, and oftentimes I felt kind of blown out of the water just by the intelligence in the room, honestly. It was, you guys assembled a fantastic charter review, and I was really proud to be a part of it. We also, staff, I want to make sure that we point out that the city attorney, city clerk, Rania from the city manager's office did a fantastic job keeping everything together, and although we didn't always agree, we respected each other's opinion. But they showed up and stayed with us through the duration, and I know the committee wants to extend their thanks. Our meetings were often intense, but one part that I feel real proud of is that we were very open to the opinions of the public. In fact, we had 2 public presentations during every meeting, and we also would stop during meetings if there was an expert in the audience that could clarify something. We went to those individuals. So I feel that we really included the public, and again, they also got to weigh in on any motion that was made. So I think we did a fantastic job as far as that goes. To speak to the attorneys, the issue of voting for mayor and the methodology, collectively, the committee wanted to make a recommendation to you. They wanted to discuss it and see if a recommendation would be prudent. Again, city attorney wasn't quite ready to go there. He wasn't sure if that was in the purview of the charter, but I decided to convene again because 11 members of the committee unanimously wanted to meet, and I felt that it was the obligation of the chair to allow those individuals to meet and make a recommendation to you. So we understand we may not have the legal background or precedents or whatever have you, but I think it's still relevant that those individuals get to bring their recommendation full circle and feel as if they actually completed the job that they felt they were tasked to do. The committee's solution addresses both the ongoing lawsuit and it also, from both a districting perspective and an alternative voting system. So there's 2 different components in there, and we actually were able to come up with a solution that somewhat addresses both. So if we could, the other piece that I wanted to make sure that I shared was, these guys back here are going to, I'm going to ask them if I forget something today, that they come up and fill you in, because this is not about me, this is about all of us. And if I forget something, I know Hassan will, but
they're running up now, Tino.
I know, and I know Steve has a card, right? He has to have a card. In fact, I can still see Steve's cards. Can we start the presentation, please? Hello. Yeah. Do I do it?
You have a clicker.
Okay, need I embarrass myself? Look, Husam's already ready to help me. Which one? This one? Good. Okay, so the first thing we talked about and we voted on was districts. Why did we come up with 2 districts versus 3 versus 6? And the bottom line was we wanted to eliminate the popularity contest because a lot of folks felt that it is when you run by seat, it's often a popularity contest. And that was one of the points of contention with the current system, is that a lot of people felt that it just wasn't fair and appropriate. So coming up with 2 seats, what that does is it actually, 2 districts, 3 seats in each district, it lowers the threshold for a candidate to be elected. So if you have 3 individuals, given the ranked choice voting, the threshold for actually winning is much lower. So those individuals that are for instance, we were really looking at the minority component of the election. When you have a lower threshold, there's a higher probability that you could very well elect a minority candidate. And therefore, we felt that if you have 3 open seats at one point in time, that is going to actually meet the spirit of the lawsuit. Whether you agree with the lawsuit or not, it meets the spirit of the lawsuit, okay? And that's basically why we went to 2 districts versus 3 or versus 6. The other piece was when you look at Santa Clara and you look at the census of 2010, it seems very difficult to draw districts because we are such a diverse city. So it was very difficult to say this part would be for this minority class and try to do it that way. It just didn't make sense. Maybe the 2020 census will shed more light on our demographic, but as of today, it didn't make sense. Next slide, please. I do it. God, I want you to do it. I want to feel important. Okay. Oh, gosh. All right. And this is just basically a kind of how we looked at things. And again, with 2 districts, we offer, this scenario offers the lowest winning threshold. What it also does, again, what we also talked about was polarizing geographical-based issues. So it's more spread out, so there's more representation for a larger part of the city. So I'll move on. If you want to go to ranked choice voting and you want a detailed explanation of ranked choice voting, I've already solicited my compadre who put together these slides and is sort of educated me in the process of ranked choice voting. So Hassan will come up and answer any of your questions as far as how votes are allocated, so on and so forth, if that's what you want to know. Okay, so I'll defer to Hassan. We looked at what the sample ballot looks like. One of our concerns is if we were to go to this system, is that this would be completely new. And so how many people would know to vote for 3 different people? So that was one of the concerns that we had, but through education, through the city clerk's office, we were assured that there would be ample education going forward if this were to be adopted. But again, that is one of the drawbacks is that it would be entirely new, a new way of actually voting. So do you guys want to go into the minutia, so to speak, or kind of, because I have a feeling you're going to say no, and I hope you say no. But basically what it does is the essence of the ranked choice vote, and Hassan will probably reiterate this, is that no vote is wasted. If your candidate that you voted for, number 1, meets the threshold, then your remaining votes, the excess votes, are redistributed. So everybody's vote is not just I have to vote for A or B. And what we thought was, well, if everybody thinks A is automatically going to win, then the question is, should I give my vote to A or should I give my vote to B? Should I, if they wanted to make sure that their vote counted. And so what this does is this reallocates votes until you get 3 candidates that meet the threshold. And so it's just basically it's a continual process until you get 3. And in our case, it would be 33% plus 1. So when you have 3.
Tom could tell us that in a different way. He's behind you.
Oh, I know, I can hear him. Trust me, I know he's behind me. Okay. So I'm going to skip through these and let him actually give you his take on this. But going back to the transition plan, again, what we wanted to do was we wanted to get it to a point to where we would have District A perhaps is a gubernatorial, during a gubernatorial race, and District B would be during a presidential. So you would vote, your district would vote every 4 years for 3 candidates. And the way that it's broken out here, we can explain it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. In order to get there, we came up with, actually, Steve Chesson, I want to say. Forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. This was actually something that he brought to the table and made a lot of sense. And so we sort of looked at it and said, we made our motion based on what he presented because he did an excellent job. And so this is how we get to a point where we can get on track as soon as possible to where we have 2 districts and then 3 candidates for each district. And we switch between gubernatorial and presidential elections. Okay. So in a nutshell, at a very high level, that's it. I apologize if I'm a little bit not quite there. It's been a long day. But are there any questions that you might have for me?
Vice Mayor Caserta?
Yes, and this is for you, City Attorney, et cetera. Was there any discussions on where the boundaries are drawn, or do we have to hire someone separately in the next, between now and March for that, is the first question.
We would deal with how to draw the boundaries at a later time. So it wouldn't be the Charter Review Committee would not be drawing the boundaries. We'd either start the process before the election, or maybe even it's somewhat up in the air as to how we would draw the boundaries, but it would not be the Charter Review Committee that would be drawing the boundaries. There's some processes that other jurisdictions have engaged in terms of drawing the boundaries, and we'd have to put a process into the either the code. We could do it through the code, or we could do it in the charter itself. I would recommend not doing it in the charter itself. I would say something like, and the charter provisions shall allow to a district setting process via an ordinance, so that you'd have some flexibility as to how the process would work, depending on.
And then my other question is, and someone asked me this today, I didn't know the answer to it. You know, we're under a lawsuit, blah, 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 but let's say we divide districts, whether it's El Camino, north, south, whatever, just as an example. And let's say only people in the southern part of El Camino can vote. Are we denying the right to vote of people that live in the north for these candidates? Meaning, are we opening ourselves up to another lawsuit of quote-unquote voter suppression?
I mean, there's all kinds of district elections. In fact, the
That's what I thought.
Voting Rights Act says you should go to districts to not disenfranchise people.
And we had spirited discussion on that. And we had spirited discussion on how we should divide, and then we'd have to bring them back, because everybody, you know, the question is, how are we going to do this? And so that's not what we were tasked to do.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Tina? Not at this point. I have.
The final thing was, I've had a number of committee members that also said that they were questioning whether or not the council was going to ask this committee to look at other issues or charter items.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I wanted to make sure I asked that on their behalf. Thank you. I'm going to leave and go home.
You mean, are you done yet? No.
No.
Not.
So I'll leave it up to these guys to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Hassam, did you want to say anything else about the ranked choice voting?
Well, I could walk you through an example, and I promise to be quick. That way you guys know what you're voting for.
That's an oxymoron from Hassam.
What? To promise to be quick?
To be quick.
It's okay. I'm used to the 2-minute timer, so I can be fast. It's cool. So I think before we start, I think Tino did cover it, why the threshold is important. And so this is talking about what it takes to guarantee a win. I think everybody understands the one seat open one, that if you get 50% of the vote plus 50% plus one vote, the next best person can only get 49.99% of the vote. So you're guaranteed that win. And it's just it follows a mathematical formula. So when you look at, you could do 4 seats, you could do 5, 10, 20, it doesn't matter. But when you're looking at 3 seats open, if the 3 top candidates get 25% plus 1 vote each, then the 4th best person can only get 24.98% or whatever, right? So they will always be less. So that's, the takeaway here is always on the bottom of the slide. So having more seats open at a single time lowers the threshold to guarantee a win, thereby making it easier for minority voices to have a chance at winning a seat at the table. And don't pay attention to where the lines are drawn. This is just showing you how, in each scenario, what that threshold should look like, and that's why we picked 2 districts. Okay, so again, so the threshold to win is 25%. So like Tino basically, explained, if I'm thinking of voting for a candidate who's really, really popular, and I know that they're probably going to win, if I'm a clever voter, I try to game the system and I say, well, they don't really need my vote, so should I vote for them or give it to somebody else? With ranked choice voting, you don't need to do that. You vote for who you believe in, even if they're the top candidate, because any extra votes that person gets over the threshold gets redistributed to people's second favorite choice. So no vote is wasted. So in this example, candidate A gets more votes past the 25% threshold. So that number of votes gets redistributed based on people's second priority. The people who voted for A, it gets redistributed proportionally to their second preference. So A is now guaranteed to be a council member. So then, since candidate A received 7 votes beyond the winning threshold, we're going to divvy those up based on how people pick their second choice. So in this example, 3 go to C, 2 go to D, 2 go to E. Okay. One of the pros of ranked choice voting is because you have to rank your candidates in order of preference, it reduces negative campaigning, because nobody wants to be the jerk. Because if you're the jerk candidate, then nobody will put you as their second or third choice, right? So you're hoping that if people aren't going to pick you as their top choice, that maybe you get their second or third. So this is another plus of ranked choice voting, is that it reduces negative campaigning. Okay, so we don't have anybody over the threshold, so then we basically say, sorry, candidate D, you had no chance of winning. You had the lowest number of votes. So we're going to eliminate you. But what happens to all the voters who voted for D? They feel like their vote was wasted. But no. So we go to the next person on their ballot, on their ranking, and we redistribute their vote to who they liked after candidate D. So D gets eliminated. We've redistributed the people who voted for D to whoever they preferred after D. So they're redistributed. So B gets over the threshold, but if you see the picture, they have 1 more vote than they need. So we're going to actually redistribute that vote. So like I said, candidates never receive more votes than they need to win. So it empowers votership's voice in getting the most representative council. So B is now declared a council member, and we take that extra vote and give it to whoever people picked for as their next top choice. In this example, it's C. So C gets that extra vote and is now over the threshold. Now, in this example, if, for example, E was the next preference, neither C nor E would be over the threshold. But at that point, you would then look at, so if that 1 dot where C, got that extra dot over the line, instead went to E, C still has more votes than E. So the idea is that you get a consensus-driven representative council. So this is looking at, if we were just to take the same exact vote that people initially cast in a plurality system, which is what we have today with seats, but we have a plurality system. versus what the outcome would look like in a ranked choice system. In a plurality system, candidate A, B, and E would win the election. In the ranked choice vote system, candidates A, B, and C win. And that's basically saying that C is a more consensus candidate than E was. Because D had no chance in winning, so we took D's votes and redistributed it. And the excess votes from A were also redistributed. And after that redistribution, based on people's rank, C was a more consensus candidate rather than E. So that's the walkthrough.
So thank you. I think we have a couple questions here. Vice Mayor Caserta?
So City Clerk, these are directed at you. So what this person just presented was, we are not going to know who the top vote getter was. Is that correct?
No, you'll know the candidates that got 50, all of the candidates got the threshold plus one at the end of the voting.
Okay. So as someone that actually wrote their master's thesis on this, what I campaigned on and what I hoped for was, for example, in my election, I got 43% of the vote. We the people is defined as popular sovereignty, which is majority rule. I did not get 50% of the vote plus one, but in a plurality system, I won the seat. I think from a substantive and procedural perspective, to be more democratic, I want to get a candidate through the alternative voting system, like they do in Oakland, like they do in Berkeley, like they do in the city and county of San Francisco, to eventually get a candidate who has majority of the vote, 50% plus one. So I don't think this accomplishes that. And I actually think this empowers incumbency even more. And my goal was to be more democratic and get candidates that eventually, again, you have ranking voting systems. You want to have a spoiler effect that will eventually get a candidate at 50% of the vote. And case study, 92, Clinton gets 43% of the popular vote. Most people voting for Perot, who got about 18% of the popular vote, if there was an alternative voting system, their second choice would have been Bush, and he would have been the president. In 2000, 2% of people in Florida voted for Nader. Over 80% of them would have voted for Gore as their second choice, and we would have had a completely different election cycle. So this concerns me from a procedural and substantive perspective for someone that studied this in graduate school. Okay? Rod.
Yeah, may I share that the process that you're talking about in many other cities is where there's one open, and oftentimes instant runoff voting is done where there's one opening in a seat. What they're talking about here with regards to that lower threshold is because they're talking about multiple openings in the same, in essence, a seat, cutting the city in half.
I was hoping that,
that
as you said, the former would happen, that we would actually have in November of 18, instead of 3 candidates running in one area, maybe 3 districts and multiple candidates do the alternative voting system. Someone that studies this, that is more procedurally and substantively democratic.
Okay.
I don't think there was a question there. Councilmember O'Neill?
Thank you. So,
please,
Hassam, on your diagram where you show the excess, all the colored dots, that one. Okay, so my question is, so you show there that candidate received 8 more than was required to, or so 7, okay, the 25% plus 1. So which 7 votes do you pick to redistribute? Because, I mean, within their pool of votes, I mean, they could have like a wide variety of second choice. So how, because it could be very different result depending on which 7 votes
Which votes you counted first and which ones came in last. Very good question. Those votes get redistributed proportionally based on everybody who voted for candidate A, what their second pick was. So it doesn't matter what order you count the votes from candidate A. I have 7 votes to redistribute. I will look at proportionally how many of people who picked A as their first pick, picked B as their second, C as their second, D as their second, E as their second, and F as their second, and I would divvy up the 7 votes based on that percentage.
So-
Okay, right.
So it doesn't matter which order the votes come in.
So they won't just go to one candidate, they'll be distributed.
It will be distributed proportionally. That's why these voting systems are called proportional voting systems. Because the bottom line is that an easy way to think of this thing is to think of yourself as a voter, not to think of how the registrar counts it, but to think of yourself as a voter. When I fill out my ballot, if I think somebody's an underdog and I'm in a current system, a plurality system, I may choose not to vote for them because I'll feel like, well, they have no chance in winning, and so my vote will just get thrown in the trash. And we don't want that wasted vote effect. So we want people to vote for who they believe in. And because they rank it, that if their top pick doesn't get selected, their vote goes to their next favorite pick. It's very similar to what we have, right? You know, a lot of cities have in terms of the June primary and then the November runoff. But that's just a two-stage versus as many stages as are needed here.
So I remember 4 years ago, 5 maybe, we had a charter review recommendation to the council, and also we talked about this ranked choice voting. And they said, the registrar of voters said, oh, we should have this in 5 years. So we obviously they don't have the capability yet of dealing with this type of voting system. Is there an idea as to when the register of voters are looking at? Because 5 years ago is 5 years, so.
The ROV has in your staff report a presentation that they actually came to the committee and presented to us. And they said that they would have the system in place by 2019 and ready for the 2020 election. And that would be countywide.
So would everyone in the county have to have this type of voting?
No, they have access to that kind of voting system if they so choose.
City attorney?
What they told us was they would have a new upgrade in software that would allow for any jurisdiction that chose this type of voting. They believe they would have it. It's kind of a two-step process. They would have to have the software in place, and then they would have to get I forget who at the state, but someone at the state would have to certify, Secretary of State, right?
Would certify.
Yeah, Secretary of State would have to certify that their system would work for our type of voting.
Does the ROV have the capability for the AV system right now like they do in other cities?
For what system?
The alternative voting system where you have
they said
multiple people running in a race. And
for 2018, they said they would not have capability for anything other than cumulative voting.
City attorney, I wasn't finished with my question. When the charter review has the recommendation to us about the districts, I get that for the vote. But because it's not available now, is that something we put in the question if we're going to move ahead with their recommendation? Do we put it in the question that when it's available, we want to do this? Or do we go back out again when it's available and then ask,
no,
do you want to change this system?
You could enact a charter provision that says when available. That it would actually say that right in the ballot measure.
So what if it comes out that it's a little bit different than what we think it is now? How does that work?
There's several different ways of doing it. I mean, I could write a charter amendment that would basically allow the council by ordinance to deal with these different contingencies, or you could put it directly in the charter. And how much specificity, I would probably recommend having less specificity in the charter itself, so that the charter would be more directive as to how you would write these ordinances, so that with the various possibilities of what could happen in a future election system with the registrar of voters, you might want to have some flexibility at the council, at the legislative level, so you wouldn't have to go back for another charter amendment if something didn't work out quite well.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan, you had a question?
Yeah. So if I understand that if a candidate doesn't meet a threshold, the least on your screen here, if they didn't have the +1, then D's votes would get reallocated. And assuming one went over to A, then he's a winner and the rest get reallocated again. My question is, though, you have 2 districts with 3 seats, But you're saying that the voter's only going to vote for one candidate as their first choice, or are they going to get 3 first choice votes and then second choices on each of 3 seats?
No, so what you would do is, like on this sample ballot, there are many ways to draw the ballot, but these are just a couple samples that are used today in other jurisdictions. And then from the perspective of what is familiar to users, the one on the left is probably more familiar to what people in Santa Clara have, because it's just a complete the line type of a thing. But you would basically have all the candidates that you could vote for in every column. But you're saying, I'm picking my first, so in this example, Diego Rivera is, whoever the voter is, pick Diego Rivera for their first pick, and then Arthur Miller for their second pick, and Eleanor Roosevelt for their third pick.
So you're voting for 3 candidates because there's 3 open seats.
So if the ballot could actually allow for it, you could be able to rank as many numbers as there are candidates on the list. That is going to be completely dependent on what the ROV system can handle and how long you want the ballot paper to be. So you could limit it like these jurisdictions do to just picking your top 3, rather than in this example, there are 6 candidates. Theoretically, you could rank them 1 through 6. And you can say, I like this person the most, and then this person the second most, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth.
So it's unlike cumulative voting. So for instance, if I really liked Eleanor Roosevelt, I could vote for her 3 times.
Correct.
And
This
cast
is very
3
different than
votes.
that. Yes. In ranked choice voting, voting for the same person 3 times has the same effect of just voting for them once and then not voting for anybody in your second and third.
Okay, but in a cumulative voting system,
It would make a difference.
you have 3 votes cast by one person. Do we have any information, data, whatever, that supports one method
Yes.
over another as to the electing of minority candidates?
Yes. So this actually ranked choice voting, there are different kinds of proportional systems. Cumulative voting is a proportional system. There's another system called limited voting, which is also a proportional system. Ranked choice voting is another proportional system. Mathematically speaking, or statistically speaking, ranked choice voting will give you the most proportional system representing the division within the city, or the breakdown within the city. So in the example of cumulative voting, you may stack all your votes with one person, but that may not be as representative as you would get when you got a ranked choice voting after all the votes have been redistributed or reallocated. So mathematically speaking, ranked choice voting is the system that gives you the most representative council relative to the electorate, which when we elect more than one person in a cycle, so in this example, which the committee has recommended 2 districts with 3 council members each, the threshold is 25% plus 1. So
Except that if I'm a minority voter and I want to make sure, and I have a minority constituency, and we don't have districts that are going to be heavily weighted
Correct.
with any group. So I want to make sure that my minority candidate gets as many votes as possible. The minority group voters are going to want to cast 3 votes for their one candidate and have all 3 count. So it seems to me if that's our goal, that cumulative voting may achieve it better.
But let me address
I have
that.
another
So-
question. So an alternative is simply to have plurality votes. You have 3 seats open, you have 7 candidates, everybody just votes, and the top 3 vote getters win, regardless of whether they have a majority. They're just a plurality. Is that right?
That is what a plurality is.
But that's an option too.
That is not a proportional system.
I know, but that's
Oh.
what I'm saying. It's an
Oh,
option.
it's sure, it definitely is an option. I mean, cumulative voting is an option, as are any of the other ones that I mentioned. But when you're looking at trying to get minority representation, by using a proportional system, whether it's cumulative or ranked choice or limited voting, you are empowering minority candidates, because at that point, they don't have to think about how do I coordinate with other peoples within my protected class. So for example, let's say you had a protected 2 Latinos running, or 2 Latino Americans running. How would some of the voters know to give 3 of their votes to candidate A who's Latino versus candidate B who's Latino? So with ranked choice voting, some people will pick candidate A as their first pick, and then the others will pick and then they'll pick B as their second. And some people will pick B as their first pick and A as their second. In the way the tallies are counted up, when this happens, neither one of those parties will waste their votes. And so you'll still get an accurate representation of the electorate, or at least what the electorate prefers. And with only 25% plus 1 being the threshold, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Latino population in Santa Clara is in the mid-20s, and the Asian population is in the low 30s.
Okay,
So they would be able to
Gotcha. I understand. I had one more question that's
get a
probably more for,
candidate.
thank you, Hassam. For the city attorney, because I think the committee did a fabulous job and great job of getting all of this done in record time. Can we split these when it comes to the ballot measure? In other words, can we have the district as one initiative on the ballot, the districting as proposed by the committee, and the ranked choice voting a separate initiative so that people can vote on each section? Because I'm afraid if someone doesn't like ranked choice voting, but they're in favor of districts and they see the value in it, that they would vote no on the whole thing. You know what I'm saying?
You can certainly have different ballot measures and break this down. There is a school of thought that if you were to only have 2 districts and then have plurality voting within each district, that would be, certainly people have raised objection to that as being less likely to lower barriers for minorities to get elected. So if you want to carry through the thinking of the committee, I would suggest you keep it as one ballot measure for the 2 districts with their recommended voting method. But it's if there were to be 2 ballot measures, in other words, if there was another ballot measure for 6 districts, whichever ballot measure won would be the one that whichever got more votes would be the system that you'd have. And that way the people could decide. This is hard to really think through, because if it's possible that someone could look at this and say, this is very complicated, and for that reason alone, I'm not going to vote for it. So we have to keep all those thoughts in mind. However, this is what was recommended, and I can write this up, and you can make decisions about this later on.
One more question, though, is you've got 3 on the presidential year, 3 on the gubernatorial year. Does that mean that only half the city is voting in any given election?
Whenever you go to districts, you're going to be eliminating, unless you want to have elections every 2 years, right, you're going to have people not being able to vote for a candidate. It's just a question of where that would happen. So if you went to 6 districts, you'd still have only half. If you went to 3 districts, you'd have maybe 2/3 and 1/3. But with elections every 4 years and not wanting to elect everybody every 4 years,
right? Gotcha. Okay.
You're going to have some people not being able to vote for council members.
Okay, Councilmember Davis.
I don't really have any more questions. Were we ready to have a? Do we have cards?
Yes, there's cards. And
okay,
I think.
And I just did want to thank Tino. I know he's out, but he did a fantastic job of chairing, and Keith for vice chairing the committee. Thank you both. And I was really surprised and pleased to see that in our last meeting, every vote that we took was unanimous with everybody that was in the room. So after a lot of debate, we all pretty much got consensus on the recommendation. So I felt that the committee worked pretty well together.
Thanks.
Okay. And a comment to you, Councilmember Mahan. There are no municipalities in California that use cumulative voting. There are several that use ranked choice voting. So in that sense, we thought ranked choice voting was more accepted in the state and more likely to be, approved by the Secretary of State.
Keith, did you guys discuss the AV system? Because did you guys discuss the AV system? Like in my election, a lot of people that voted for Roseanne might have voted for Kevin Park, and we might have got a minority candidate would get 50% of the vote. So specifically, why wasn't that embraced by the committee?
So if there's the AB and there's a question of getting to a majority.
That's what, yeah.
And I don't, if you want to get to a majority, you either have to have single elections for single seats.
Yeah.
So we'd maintain seat numbers, and we would not have districts, and we would not comply with one of the safe harbors in the lawsuit. And then you have to have primaries, or you have to use instant runoff voting. And instant runoff voting, from a voter's perspective, looks almost identical to ranked choice voting, in that you look at all the people on the ballot and you say, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. The difference with ranked choice voting is if there is a candidate that has the support of 25% of the city or 20% of the district plus one person, and a ranked choice voting, that person will get elected. And in what you're proposing, a single thing, they will get elected sometimes, and they will not get elected other times. And since the goal was, to the extent possible, to make it more likely for members that are protected by the California Voting Rights Act to get representation for those groups in Santa Clara that exceed 25% of the population, the expectation is that if they have candidates they prefer, those candidates should win a seat.
Thank you, Keith.
Yes, go ahead, Ron.
There was a statement made earlier that in any district election, you're going to automatically have folks who don't vote in a particular cycle. There was one concept that the committee had talked about, which would be 3 multi-member districts of 2 members each that would be elected in gubernatorial and presidential alternating cycles. So you would actually have in that concept the entire city voting on a council member in each election cycle. However, in balance, the committee was trying to, and I'll paraphrase on behalf of the committee, I believe, the committee was trying not only to look at the district concept, but also lowering the overall voter threshold for election. So they wanted to have multi-member districts, not just a single voter looked at. And in balance, the committee felt that the drawback of having half of the city only able to vote and their city council members every 4 years was overweighed by the ability to have a lower voter threshold. So an emerging minority population in Santa Clara with a lower overall voting base could have a chance of voting somebody if you believe that people vote based on ethnicity.
And that's reflected on this picture where you have 3 districts, 2 council members each. You could either vote for, on presidential cycles, 1 council member from each of your district, and then on gubernatorial vote for the other. So only 1 seat is open per election cycle. So your threshold is 50% plus 1, which is still a pretty high threshold. Or you say, you know what? District A and District B vote in presidential years, kind of like how we have right now. We have 4 seats open in presidential years. And then District C votes in gubernatorial years. And you get to vote for both at the same time. That threshold gets dropped down to 33% plus 1. So it's still higher than what we ended up with which is 25% plus 1. So we did look at both options, and we decided that going to 2 districts would give us a lower threshold, which makes it easier for minority candidates to be represented. Do you want to add something to that?
And I think I'll say one of the downsides to districts is that you only vote every 4 years. 2011, I was on a charter review committee, and we made a recommendation to adopt a proportional voting system. We did not recommend districts in 2011. And that system would have, every 2 years, the entire city would vote for 3 council people. They would have used some ranked choice system because we recommended a proportional vote. And since the threshold is still 25% plus 1 when you're electing 3 seats, the entire city would be voting, but it would be likelier that A population which is above 25% would be able to elect candidates of their choice. We don't recommend that here because there is no safe harbor if we do not adopt districts in some sense. So getting the safe harbor is what is causing that pain or that unhappiness with this solution.
Thank you. I'm holding your motion, Councilmember Davis, but Councilmember Mahan, you have another question?
Oh, sorry, I was going to make a motion, because I thank you, Mr. Sattenfield and Mr. Hagag, for that explanation. It's clarified it in my mind.
Sorry, just
So-
to add to what Keith said, this is exactly what's being shown here,
Yeah.
where it's still the same threshold, but you elect every 2 years 3 members from across the city. But again, you don't get the safe harbor of being a district from being sued.
Right.
So it's still the same threshold. In this case, you get to vote every 2 years. In this case, you only get to vote every 4 years, but both of them have a low threshold for enabling minority candidates to win.
You know what? I bet half the city every 2 years is going to be really happy that they don't have all that stuff in their mailbox.
Amen.
So, yeah, so I'm going to be supporting this committee's recommendation, and I would have been making the motion, but.
Councilmember Davis has a motion pending, but I would like to get through the cards first because we have quite a few. Andrew Boone, if you'd like to come first, and then Nick Kawada after that.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Boone. If I understood it correctly, you're being forced to have districts. Is that correct?
Called a lawsuit.
So I just hope that there's some way out of that, because I think it's not a very good system when people are on a council and they don't represent everybody in the city. The way you have it now, at least you all represent everybody who lives in the city. Thank you.
Yes, that's an issue we'll have to discuss. Nick Kawada, welcome.
Good evening. So first of all, I wanted to admire your tenacity to keep going this late at night. I think
We're not done, yeah.
Oh,
I know.
This
That's
is
the most amazing thing. So my name is Nick Kawada. I'm a staff attorney at the Asian Law Alliance, and we are counsel for West Mukuyama, who's actually the plaintiff in this case. And I'm here to make a really simple message that unfortunately the committee is under the wrong assumption that going to 2 districts does not put you in safe harbor, that will not protect you from further lawsuits under the CVRA. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Kurt Vartan, come forward, and then Scott Lane.
Isn't that nice?
Evening.
Good evening.
Morning.
A pizza.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I know. I should have brought them. So my initial question was, I was just wondering how much participation was there from the committee that was appointed by the council, like on a per meeting basis, some kind of statistic, like I know in the last one, the charter committee, there some kind of fell off in the middle, and I was wondering what the participation was overall, and it's great to see that kind of unanimous voting. But in hearing, I didn't know much about ranked choice voting until hearing the presentations. I really appreciate hearing them. And unless you sit through a really long council meeting and get to see this like this, I don't think you appreciate what it actually means, and going through those iterations and examples. And you could send somebody a flyer, they're not going to read it, they're going to throw it away, and you're not going to really get the kind of understanding I think that is necessary to make this effective in your city. So I would just encourage you, as I would encourage in most things, is educate your community about this aggressively. Don't just think it's flyers. Don't just hand out emails or send out emails and hand out things in your Silicon Valley Power envelope. But actually hold community meetings in the community, like tens of them, maybe not hundreds of them, but tens of them. You have 18 months to do this. Or 12 months to do it, then you should make a concerted effort to do that. Maybe it's a weekly coffee chat, and let's go over ranked choice voting, really exciting stuff. Make sure you give a lot of free food away. But that's the only way I think this is going to be to deliver the message that you guys want, which is to have a more representative government and to have people participate. They have to be educated and knowledgeable about what it is you're asking them to do. And those charts up there, there's no way someone without someone telling them and asking questions in a dialogue are going to digest that. or at least not do it effectively that I think you would want them to do. So I would stress that. I hope you come up with a plan with this. Maybe it's not in this motion, but in a further motion to really look at how you do community outreach to educate.
Thank you. Scott Lane, and then Rob Ritchie.
I'm not sure if the carriage is still a carriage or if it's a pumpkin now. Anyway, another meeting past midnight. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank the Charter Review Committee. I was going to actually try to go up to about 100,000 feet and maybe come up with a slightly different strategy. What if we had tremendous outreach? Not like we did with the city manager, unfortunately. I'm not sure how that went off the rails. But, you know, let's say that you had said there will be public money to finance these elections. There won't be any fundraising. There won't be special interests or whatever you want to call it. Now, I realize special interests can be from corporations to unions to mom and pop stores. But what if you actually had it where you didn't have to worry about fundraising? Combine that with actually going from an $11,000 whatever dollar a year council salary to something like $100,000 a year. Then therefore anybody could say, I don't have to take the risk of trying to be a single parent household with a couple of kids and maybe taking care of my ailing mother or father, whatever. Where do I find the time between my 2 or 3 jobs to also be a city council person, which is like a 30 to 40 to 50 hour job? I realize that's maybe out of this purview, but I really think it should be the purview. Because I mean, if you're looking at how are we gonna get full representation of people from all across the city of any, not just ethnicity, but any socioeconomic group, differently abled people, whatever you want to call it, we have to find the level playing field. And for some people, you know how hard it is to fundraise. You know how hard it is to do the campaigning, never mind, you know, the fundraising. You have to do all that. You know, I think if you also would consider that, does that give you the safe harbor? I think that would, and I personally think that'd be a better issue. Whether or not districts are the right choice for Santa Clara, I really don't know. I'm really not sure about that. I do know ranked choice voting can work. However, the first time they did it in Oakland, you know, they were really upset because a lot of the voters didn't know about it, and frankly, some of the candidates didn't know about it. So if you do go ranked choice, which I think can work in a great way, you need to make sure the education outreach is tremendous.
Thank you, Scott. Rob Ritchie, and then Pedro Hernandez. Good evening. Good morning.
Good morning. It's Rob Ritchie. I'm actually with the national organization Fair Vote, and I was out here for an event and joined Pedro to be here. I've been working on this for a long time, and it's exciting to have a chance to hear this debate about it. Ranked choice voting was passed in Maine last year. We were involved in that. They're going to use it for congressional and Senate elections there. We just have been working on a congressional bill to do this multi-member ranked choice voting system that several members have put in including your congressman here. Fair Vote also, by the way, I just wanted to mention as I look at you, my wife works on a project on representation of women from Fair Vote, and I have never spoken before a majority women legislative body. But ranked choice voting is very common around the world, just to make sure that that's clear. I noticed Limerick, Ireland is your sister city. They use the multi-member for their parliamentary elections. They use the single winner for the presidential elections, exact same ballot. And speaking to your concern, when you're electing one person, getting a majority winner, I think is a sensible goal, and ranked choice voting accomplishes that. When you're picking a legislative body, you want the majority of the legislature to reflect a majority, and that's what this system does, but with each person electing a piece of that majority, and that's what makes it broadly representative as well. And you go through the logistics, it looks like, you know, like all these dots moving around from the voter. It's, you know, really as simple as 1, 2, 3. One thing I wanted to mention is just the last point is that we were part of a study of ranked choice voting in practice in 7 cities that use it, 14 that didn't, control cities, and one of those control cities was Santa Clara. But they polled 4,800 people, and including a chunk here in Santa Clara. They found that in the ranked choice voting cities, people really did have a positive reaction to the system. They measured a more, you know, civil campaigns and a more kind of engaging experience. They also liked it more than their previous system. And Santa Clara voters also liked the idea with that sort of similar question. A majority of them supported it as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Pedro. And then Steve Chesson. And then Teresa Sulcer. I can't. That's not what this says here.
All right.
Maybe it does. Okay.
Right.
Welcome. Welcome.
Good morning, yeah. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director of Fair Vote California, which is a project of Fair Vote National. We study the some of these voting rights cases and try to weigh in on alternative voting systems on some of these voting rights cases that we've weighed in jurisdictions from out of the state and within the state as well. We think that ranked choice voting, single transfer vote, and the multi-member district, or even perhaps at large, is an appropriate voting system given the high diversity and highly integrated nature of Santa Clara. Its Asian citizen voting age population is 31%. Its Latino citizen voting age population is 15.5. Because there is a lower threshold to win under ranked choice voting in a multi-seat, in the same threshold and calculation applies for cumulative voting and limited voting. We looked at the citizen voting age populations of a hypothetical district or district plan, 2 districts with a low deviation, so roughly about the same population in each district. And what we found is that the citizen voting age population of the Asian population is above the 25%. Either 28 or 32 is what we roughly looked at. That was our analysis of it. We cut the line vertically. Well, I don't know what would happen if you cut it vertically. But we think that also that the ranked ballots used in Santa Clara would be of great benefit. You have a lot of Asian American candidates running against each other, and utilizing a ranked ballot would reduce the possibility of vote splitting. So you can have several candidates from a group run without undermining that group's ability to vote a candidate of choice. We have a few recommendations. As you consider, we say that you ought to use ranked choice voting, the bottom-up version of it, in the interim, so the next election in 2018, and then have the full ranked choice voting system in 2020. I'll send an email regarding this, and I would also add considering a deadline to the implementation of it to make sure that it actually becomes implemented in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Chesson, and then Teresa.
Thank you. My name is Steve Chesson. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council, and I admire your stamina. My name is Steve Chesson. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform, and I was one of the experts who educated the Charter Review Committee on various voting methods and transition options. One of the concerns raised was that you wouldn't know who the top vote getter is, and that's actually not true. If you look at the way the results get reported, you do see A is the top vote getter, and the results get reported showing the round by round how the votes get transferred, who came in second, who came in third, who got the most transfer votes, etc. What this ranked choice voting system is, it's a proportional system. The basic principle of proportional representation is majority rule with fair representation for the electoral minority. With this kind of system, 70% of the voters in a district voting as a block will elect a majority of the council members in that district, but they won't elect all of them. 30% of the voters voting as a block will be able to elect one person. So you get that. Cumulative voting is a semi-proportional system that allows for, but doesn't guarantee proportional results, because the minority group might split their votes among too many candidates, whereas ranked choice voting, they would all bubble up so they could elect somebody. Similarly, the majority might spread their votes out, might put their votes all on too few candidates, and therefore not get to elect anybody. So I urge that you adopt the recommendation of the Charter Review Committee with the modification that until the county can implement single transferable vote, that you ask them to implement the bottom-up form of ranked choice voting. And secondly, I also urge you to let the CRC to continue to meet, because at your meeting of April 11th, the motion you passed said that the council approve the Charter Review Committee's work plan to focus on district and various other methods of electing members to the city council in time for the June 2018 election, and other items that the committee wants to work on prior to the November 2018 election. As they do want to continue to meet to discuss other items pertaining to that election, I hope you will let them do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa?
So I just wanted to share with the council that one of the issues that we grappled with when we were looking at the districts was the possibility that a two-district solution would have a polarizing effect within the city. And after seeing the presentation on the Freedom Circle development and the other developments that could potentially be happening over there, I would like to recommend that it's really important when you recommend the districting lines be drawn, that there's some way to distribute potential development so that the city doesn't have a lopsided perspective on development.
Very good point. Thank you. Anyone else? I don't have any other cards. Please come forward. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Herbir. I'm here as a resident, not a commissioner. I appreciate all the work that these guys have done because I've actually listened to some of their charter review meetings and they've really had a difficult task. A couple of things that one gentleman that just came up, who's the counsel for the plaintiff, he said that the districting would not cover safe harbor. And I listened to the meetings the committee had, in which that was a very specific discussion that they were going down the districting route because that was the understanding that would provide a safe harbor. So my question to, I guess, our attorney, the council, and our committee is that, is there a better model if safe harbor wasn't your concern? And would that be at large?
The committee won't answer if you want to talk to us.
Sorry,
Yes,
okay.
thanks.
So, well, that's my question to the, I guess, committee, if that is an option, because that was my understanding, listening to that committee's, meeting, that they chose the latter, which is the districting, due to the fact that they felt if they didn't do that, that they would not be able to be under safe harbor. So if there is a better option, if that option is that to go at large, I think that does require some evaluation and verification. I don't know if our city attorney would know better, but that is an open area which I think could help us resolve that. Because I would also like to see the fact that everybody in the city has an opportunity to elect our council members, not just a portion of the city. But I do like the whole idea of the ranked choice voting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Come forward.
Hassam Haggag here again. I'm only coming up to address a comment or a question that was made by somebody from the public who alluded to that they wanted to elect council members that would represent the whole city and not just their own district. And that's one of the things that we debated quite extensively in the committee, and we looked at San Jose as a model which doesn't work, where you get districts within San Jose which are kind of like their own mini cities, and then because there's only one council member from that district, it is a mini mayor system. And somebody in District 1 will say, hey, if you vote for me on my issues in my district, I'll vote for yes on the issues in your district. So when we actually look at the different districts, the 6-district option will create that kind of a dynamic in Santa Clara, which is a negative dynamic. When you go to a three-district system where it could end up, the lines could end up being on geographical issues, you still kind of get that, you vote for yes on my issues, I'll vote for yes on your issues. And obviously we know things about like things on the north side or things in the old quad or things near, Central Park area could create. And that's why I'm saying you have this polarizing geographical based issues and you have the mini mayor effect. By just doing 2 districts, there's no mini mayor because there's 3 council members in each district. So no one council member is the mini mayor. And it's only 1 district line. So you still care about everything that happens in the city, not just things that happen in your district. So from that perspective, 2 districts helps to alleviate. It doesn't eliminate completely. Only an at-large system will eliminate that completely. But from a districting standpoint, a 2-district system helps to alleviate those issues the best out of all of them.
Thank you. Keith?
Thank you. I guess I'd just like to, ordinarily I would have written a page that I would have given all of you. But I didn't know really what to add to the report we had. I think it's pretty concise. And someone asked how our participation was. I believe we had at least 11 people at every meeting out of 13 appointed. And for the most part, most of our decisions were either unanimous or substantially unanimous. Almost everyone participated in all the discussions. And I was very pleased and happy with how everything went. Some other questions, some other things we talked about briefly and discarded. We did talk about not going to districts at all. And in a sense, we tried to avoid the lawsuit as much as possible, but there are implications from it. And districts, if they are a safe harbor or not, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but we included them. We discussed increasing the size of the council, because if the council is bigger, there's a larger chance of more people being represented. But the bigger your council, the longer your meetings go, and the closer you have to sit to each other. And so we stuck.
Well, we're getting kind of ripe over
that.
here, so.
Yeah.
We started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so. And we're not done yet.
And there are other things that we could discuss at future meetings that I think would have other implications for increasing representation on of people on our council. I don't have a lot of other time. I mean, I'll say to Dominic's question from earlier, I'm kind of a middle-aged white guy, and it turns out the Santa Clara City Council represents me pretty well. But
there's only one.
He's not here, he's in bed right now.
I mean, I would like to have a council that had a spectrum of representation across our city. If 2/3 of our city thinks X and 1/3 of our city thinks Y, I would like 4 council members to kind of be on the X side and 2 council members to be on the Y side. And our current system means if 2/3 of the people think X, 6 council members are elected by those people. And so we are not getting those Ys. And we need to have diversity up there so that you folks can talk to each other and you can compromise, because compromises and consensus and discussion generally leads to better decisions. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Good morning.
Sad that it's morning. Hi, I'm Mary Hanaweir, and I was on the committee, and I just wanted to speak to one point of confusion, which I don't know that we know of the real answer to whether or not going to a multi-member district system will qualify for the safe harbor under the California Voting Rights Act. I think there are reasonable minds can disagree. I think the committee was persuaded that the better argument is that it would qualify for the safe harbor because of the way that the statute is worded and the fact that the operative provision of the act applies to at-large elections, and district-based elections have a clear definition in the statute, and it seemed to us that multi-member districts would fit within that definition. But I think that's people can disagree, and it's clear that obviously, like within y'all's lawsuit, it will continue to go forward and be decided by somebody probably not here, and probably whose name, you know, starts with the honorable. But we did think that it was the better set of arguments, and so that's why we felt comfortable making that recommendation. As to if that wasn't the case, I think people on the committee disagreed about whether districts have their own value and we should go to them anyway, or whether an at-large system would be their preferred system. I do think that in general, we all kind of felt that the at-large by seat was not our favorite. So we would move in some direction. So, thanks.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I was able to attend some of the meetings as an audience member, and it was a tough session to answer. And the very first question I asked was, were they trying to settle the lawsuit or solve the problem? And I think in this lawsuit, are they doing the lawsuit to put forward a slap suit, or are they trying to solve the problem? And I'm really pleased to see that they did go to districts, but I think in coming up with the type of voting system, I think that'll help solve the problem. Because I don't think we are such a well-integrated city in being very diverse with, we don't have, you know, a neighborhood that's all Hispanic, and we don't have a neighborhood that's all Indian, or we don't have neighborhoods that are very segregated that some cities may. So I think Santa Clara has done a fabulous job at really having a homogeneous city, and that we're not segregated. So districts would not solve the problem of not having that type of representation, where having a different voting system could solve that problem. Will it? Who knows? You know, people have to want to run. You can't force people to run for seats. You can't force people to vote for other people. I mean, sometimes it could be the money that's an entry to, I think adjusting how much money we spend on these elections would be another way to have more people that felt comfortable entering, because that's very, very expensive. And I'd like to see the Charter Review Committee look at something like that. I mean, I think we need to think out of the box at other ways to make it so more people can participate. But, you know, you want to solve the lawsuit or solve the problem? And I'm really pleased to see they've addressed solving the problem.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay. Has everyone spoken? Yes. Okay. Great. Debbie. Davis.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to make staff recommendation. I applaud the Charter Review Committee. You really, I mean, I know this was a hard thing to do. You had the pressure of a lawsuit and how to fix it. I think you came up with really creative ideas to do this. I disagree with the fact that, you know, our city is not cookie cutter. Everybody lives together very happily. We do not have pockets here and there and whatever. So this is going to be very hard. I guess the honorable person will make those line divisions for us going forward. But I think that you came up with a good idea, going back from your Section A to Section B to make sure that we get at least through an election cycle so that we can see how this is going to formulate and get the council to where, I guess, what everybody thinks will happen. It probably will. Don't know, because that's all in the cards. But staggering, totally agreeable with the presidential and the goob race. Also, the fact that we will have to wait till the county register of voters is able to take on ranked choice. So that is in this. So I would like to direct the city attorney to draft maybe 1 and 2, so that we have the possibility, because we are a charter city, and how that's going to look. But going on this, draft it in this direction. But I think when we were talking earlier, that you said there was a way that you could list 2 options for the charter city.
Well, I could draft.
Because I'm tired.
I could come back with a draft of whatever you like.
Okay, but no, this is the draft.
Why don't I do this? Why don't I draft this?
Yes.
And then when I bring it back, if there's some recommended tweaks to it, I can put that in there too.
Okay.
So my understanding is I will draft this, bring it back to the committee.
Yes.
Perhaps at that time I can talk about maybe some other alternatives they might want to consider, or some additions.
And bring it back to council.
And then bring it back to council.
Okay, so what is the time element on this? Do we have?
Well, we have a lot of time.
Okay, all right.
So we have until about March. I'd like to complete this maybe by December, so we know where we're going.
Okay.
And then, you know, at least be back to you by December.
Okay.
And that would be what I would plan on doing.
Okay, so my motion is to draft what they want, give it back to the Charter Review Committee, bring it back to council until December of 2017.
So it's a motion. Is there a second? Motion second. Councilmember Mahan, do you have a question?
Thank you. I'm glad you clarified that, because I really only have an interest in following the committee's recommendation. I think they worked really hard. They tackled a very tough issue. I thank them all for their service, and I think they came up with a very, very good solution. I thank Mr. Chesson for his expert advice, because I know this is like one of your passions, and I've known that for probably 25 years. So I'm glad to see that finally you have some influence and some impact here on what we're doing, and I appreciate that. I'm also going to be asked to be excused after this vote. I have to go to court in the morning, and I don't want to be guilty of malpractice because I fall asleep.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Lights on the motion. You're all waiting, right? Suspense.
Hoorah.
And it passes unanimously. Thank you so much, committee members and everyone involved, and for hanging in here so late.
Get some sleep now.
We're going to still keep going. You're welcome to stay. All right. We can't. We're not doing anything next meeting. All right. Now, next item is the Sister Cities item. I have a staff report of the put together of the sessions that I attended with some information. City Clerk, I'm going to, due to the time, and we still have a closed session to trail. Thank you very much, to be included as post-meeting material. Is there anyone else that would like to
Am I included in this report here?
I didn't include you, but you can ask to be included. Your picture's in there.
Can I please be included, Mr. Clerk, on this one to trail and post material? Thank you very much.
All right. Is there any other reports of members and special committees? City Manager, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Yes.
Last week, a question was asked by a member of the public on the cost of fireworks. You had asked me to bring it back. So I'll just quickly share with you and the public that the cost of the fireworks, 4th of July, the contract was $30,000, which also includes the Christmas lighting. And we also had a $2,500 grant from the county.
So we got the Christmas lighting included?
Included in
with
the
with the 2-for-1?
Yes.
Yes.
Good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and quickly, secondly,
Yes.
since this is our last council meeting before the break, so during this month, we'll be renovating this council chambers. And you heard of the issues, the projections, and the quality and everything. Also, we manage it remotely from the Berman building. That unit will be housed here in the back of the council chambers.
Okay.
So all those improvements will start
And all the
almost tomorrow
voting and
and
all
within a
that.
month. Yes.
How exciting. Okay. We're going to get up to this, well, maybe,
2017.
I don't know which decade. It's mind-boggling.
It's
Okay.
1960.
Thank you very much. So that'll happen starting tomorrow. Well, actually, it'll probably happen in a couple hours, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, reports of action taken in closed session. I know we're still trailing.
Going to trail.
City Attorney, any other from the earlier closed session?
There was no reportable action from the
Okay.
closed session.
All right, so the next is adjournment, and we do have one adjournment. Please adjourn ask the council to please adjourn this meeting in memory of Roberto Soto Lopez. Roberto was born on September 26, 1933. He was originally from Cuba and lived in Florida for many years. He was the father of the City of Santa Clara Parks and Recreation Department Mission City Memorial Park employee Zoraya Garay. Roberto is survived by his beloved children, grandchildren, and many nieces and nephews. Roberto passed away at the age of 83 on July 15, 2017. And ask if we could please adjourn in his memory. We have a motion and a second. We're adjourning to closed session. Lights on the motion, and that passes unanimously of those on the dais. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.